Okay, everybody, we are here for another episode of Reasoning, where I talk to very interesting people who are doing interesting things in the world. And today we have a brother who I met through social media, and I saw the work that he's doing. And when I saw his last name, I saw that this brother must be from Ghana. And so we started talking, and we halted the conversation and said this should be something that's on the podcast, because we were talking about what we're doing individually, our experiences and what have you. His brother is from Ghana, coming out of the UK. And brother, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about some of the things that you do, and then let's get into a robust conversation.
Beautiful. Peace, brother Heru. Give thanks for inviting me on your podcast. My name is Dalian Adofo. I am the other half of an educational initiative called Ancestral Voices. Ancestral Voices is an initiative I started with my wife, Verona, about 10 years ago, where our main goal and aim was to seek to demystify some of the stigmatization around specifically African spiritual philosophies and practices. By trade, I am a graphic designer, I am a visual artist, I'm a director of documentaries. I'm also a political and social commentator on many things, mainly issues related to the Black experience globally. Originally, I was born in Ghana. I've been living in the United Kingdom since my teenage years, when I was brought over for a college education. And I've been domiciled here since, but I'm a frequent traveler to Ghana as well, where I try, to keep my connections, and yeah, take that journey forward to see how we can also give a helping hand back to our people. So
Right.
that's me in a nutshell, but we can flesh that out
Yes,
as
yes.
we
So
go along.
yeah, so you have a very you have a story that's known to many who are immigrants to European or European-dominated countries like America or England or what have you, where our parents take us without consultation to these countries, right? As I
Yeah,
as I have a serious story, as I was taken from Ghana when I was 3 years old without consultation to America from my
right.
parents, and of course you're a 3-year-old child, so you're thrust into this world and you have to make sense of it. You have your own identity. I imagine you actually were more formed in Ghana because you left later. Around what age did you leave Ghana?
I left when I was 19. So I
Oh,
left
okay.
after high school. Yeah.
Okay, so
Pretty
you left when you were essentially a man.
yeah,
You reached
pretty much.
manhood, right? I left when I was 3. I still
Wow.
consider myself a Ghanaian. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but you certainly have a stronger claim because you actually went to school in Ghana, walked around Ghana as a young boy, played around, played football there, those experiences which I did not have. Even though I consider myself a Ghanaian, there's a lot of experience that I did not have. And so let's talk about Dalian, the young boy in Ghana, right? So I imagine you were probably born, were you born in the 70s?
Yep, I was born 78.
Okay, yes, you were
70.
born in the 70s. And so you're born in the 70s and you're born in a Ghana. What is happening politically in Ghana at the time when you're born?
Right. When I was born growing up, two things. I spent some time in Nigeria, because my father was a lecturer at a university there. And my mother also comes from the educational tradition.
What
She,
field
she
what field did your father lecture in?
To be honest, that's a brilliant question that you've asked, Brother Heru, because today I haven't asked, but I do know he majored in English literature.
Okay.
So I would assume it's along those lines.
Okay.
But the reason why I'm not familiar is due to the fact that when I believe I was about 3 or 4, we had to leave Nigeria because there was this political unrest between Ghana and Nigeria, which led to what they call the Ghana must go,
Yeah.
where a lot of Ghanaians were mistreated and basically deported from Nigeria. we actually didn't have to leave because of my dad's position, because Nigeria, you know, just as happens with any group of should we say deported people, the native country likes to keep those who are skilled, and then it likes to expel those who it considers a burden.
Sure.
So, you know, it would like to keep its intellectual capital there, and then those that it considers, okay, you know, you are not contributing much to us, rather you're taking from us, you can leave. But my mother felt it safer for us to leave, so she took us and the children, she took myself and my siblings back to Ghana. But obviously, I think having that long distance relationship affected their relationship somewhat. So
Sure.
they were
We
pretty
didn't
much.
understand that as children, but we definitely understand that as adults now.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
at the time, I didn't have a clue. I just thought, you know, mom just wants us to move back to Ghana for her own career development, and she had a beautiful career after that, because she was also not just a teacher. She became a principal, and she ended up working at the Ministry of Education. So I come from that kind of educational pedigree, if you will.
Sure, sure.
You know, so Ghana in the time I was growing up was under Jerry John Rawlings, and that was pretty much a one-party, one-man show. But some of the beautiful memories I have of Ghana growing up at the time, in comparison to now, was the level of security and communality, if you will. You know, growing up in Ghana, I never knew a house where they had gates with barbed wires on it. And now this is rampant in Ghana now. You have security detail even outside the house. You know, you knew everybody on the road that you lived, as well as 3 or 4 other roads. You know, you could walk into anybody's house. Everybody knew who you were, who your parents were. So the whole environment was your training ground. You know, you were always conscious of the fact that, yeah, you had, should we say, external parents. So as a result, you know, we were allowed some level of freedom that I don't even think now children enjoy in Ghana. And then, as I said, the level of security as well, because Jerry John Rawlings was very big on that military discipline. And so we didn't have, should we say, spate of armed robberies, which is quite rampant, sadly, in Ghana now. Or, you know, people just social deviancy, if you would call it that. So that was my experience in Ghana. It was a very kind of tight-lit, well-loving community. Obviously, there must be some level of youthful innocence as well, because it's what I'm experiencing that defines my experience. It doesn't mean perhaps it's the total experience that others are experiencing. But yeah, it was one of security. It was one of people who looked out for each other, and who felt comfortable with each other.
Sure.
That's roughly it.
So some of the people listening, their curiosity, I'm sure, is piqued by Ghana Must Go. A lot of people are not aware of that. And even the carrying bags that went along with Ghana Must Go, the crocus bags and the different, you know, the patched bags, and that's the Ghana Must Go bags and all of that. And even if you have those bags today and you carry some of your clothes or your luggage, you know, the older people remember that. They say, oh, Ghana Must Go, right? So can you talk about the whole Ghana Must Go, how that happened, and a little of the history behind Ghana Must Go?
That's for certain. I'll share with you the most of what I know. Because funny enough, that particular pattern on that crochet bag, as you mentioned, Louis Vuitton turned it into a bag and was selling it for about $4,000 per bag, you know, using that same cultural mimetic archetype to sell the bag, you know. And I remember we were sharing it in some of my secondary school groups, saying, can you imagine that bag that defines so much mistreatment of Ghanaians is now selling for this ridiculous amount of money?
Right. And just for the listeners, just real quick for the listeners, the bag we're talking about, there is a carrying bag that when Nigeria expelled Ghanaians, that, you know, it's a very inexpensive bag that Ghanaians would buy and essentially put all of their belongings in it. So that bag is known as the Ghana Must Go bag. It's like luggage, and it has a certain pattern with different colors on it, usually blue and white and a little red in it sometimes. And that is known as the Ghana Must Go bag in reference to a piece of luggage that people packed all their belongings in to leave Nigeria. So just to let you know what type of bag we're talking about. So yeah, please continue.
Yeah. So obviously at the time when I was much younger, I was only aware of the fact that it was Ghanaians who had been expelled from Nigeria. And this came about because in and around the early 80s, Nigeria experienced a big economic recession. Yeah. So due to the economic downfall, as tends to happen, it creates a lot of social angst. And obviously, ruling or governing bodies then look for scapegoats to use to buffer their own inability to provide for their people. So what they do is they look for the scapegoat, and in this case, in Nigeria's case, it became the Ghanaians who were they considered less educated and who had come and were working, if you want to call it, at a working class level, because really at that time in Africa there was nothing really like a working class. You were either quite well off, or you were just getting by. You know, there were no differentials in between. So the people they identified to be the source, or rather the people they misidentified to be the source of Nigeria's economic woes at the time, were Ghanaians, in particular those who were not educated or were providing some level of intellectual contribution to the Nigerian economy, which is why there were, there were some very horrible stories, people being forced to drink cement for it to congeal in their stomachs, being spiked with all sorts of iron rods. Recently we saw something similar by the South Africans. They were doing the same to Nigerians. A lot of mistreatment of people. This is literally what happened to Ghanaians, and they were forced. So you found that there was a whole group of Ghanaians just living at the airport. I remember we stayed at the airport for something like 4 days, just waiting to get on a flight to leave. But as I said, it didn't really apply to us. But I think at the time, my mother just wasn't feeling the country. She wanted to leave. So we just went and joined the exodus at the airport, and then we left. And as an adult, I grew to find out that the Ghana Must Go was part of a tradition where years before, under a different Ghanaian administration, Ghanaians had also expelled Nigerians, using basically the same guises that they were to blame for their economic woes. So this almost seemed like something that had come around. There was a bit of a, if you want to call it, a tit for tat. That had happened, I believe, a few decades apart. I can't remember the years precisely, but yeah, this happened.
And I think that people need to understand too, a lot of people may be shocked and surprised by this, right? Who are listening, they didn't realize that there's a lot of inter-country rivalry, and particularly when it comes to West Africa. There's a lot of rivalry between Ghana and Nigeria as the leaders of West Africa, right? Where, interestingly enough, the most famous Ghanaian is Kwame Nkrumah.
That's right.
Right, and that, you could even say at the time the most famous Nigerian is Ezekwe, right?
Yes.
And what's very interesting is they put Nigeria on Ezekwe put Nigeria on the map in terms of political conversation, and Nkrumah put Ghana on the map in terms of political conversation. And the sad and ironic thing is they were both Pan-Africanists.
Very interesting, that, isn't it? Yes, indeed.
And one of the tenets of Pan-Africanism is to not make any distinction between any Africans, and that we do not respect or take into account the failed importance of boundaries that we did not create, 100%. Right? That's one of the foundational underpinnings of Pan-Africanism. And the fact that Ghana became such a powerhouse in ideological and economic powerhouse of Africa, and the same thing for Nigeria, was really because of two men who were actually Pan-Africanists. And so these types of activities were completely against the tenets of the founding fathers of each country in terms of post-colonial identity. And so for that to happen was really a betrayal of our existence in the first place, right?
Indeed,
Right.
indeed,
And
indeed. I
as
love
a
how you
matter of
put that.
fact, you know, Nkrumah says on the day where Ghana declares its independence that Ghanaian independence means nothing if all of Africa is not independent. And this is a powerful statement. And then we go ahead and start a Nigeria Must Go campaign after. This is why leadership is really important, right?
Absolutely.
Because it would have never happened under the leadership of right-thinking Pan-Africanists, right?
Agree 100%.
And we're going to get into that. You know, we're going to get into that talk because, you know, one of the things that I find is very glaring, I see this in the Caribbean, I see it in Africa, right? So in the Caribbean, you have this thing where Jamaica is the powerhouse of the Caribbean, and there are other countries like Trinidad and even Barbados that may feel some type of competition for Caribbean supremacy with Jamaica. Whereas in West Africa, or Africa even in general, Nigeria is a powerhouse. Ghana is also seen as an intellectual powerhouse because of Nkrumah. And so you have these things to go back. But what is very interesting is the average Jamaican has never been to Trinidad or has never been to Barbados and vice versa. And the average Ghanaian has never been to Nigeria. And the average Nigerian has never been to Ghana. We don't even know each other well.
True.
Right?
True. Yes.
And so what's very interesting is that you are one of those Ghanaians who actually has an experience in Nigeria. You spent time in Nigeria. And a lot of people will be shocked to hear these things.
Yes.
How do Ghanaians not know anything about Nigeria? How do Nigerians not know, you know, except for those who immigrated for business or for just a better life, right? Because the only way someone immigrates to another country is for a better life, because no one wants to leave home, right? No one wants to leave home. If things are sweet at home, everyone wants to leave to stay home, right?
100%,
so it's very,
why not?
Yeah. So a lot of people on the outside would be shocked to hear these things that, you know, our educational system, we don't learn about each other.
Not at all.
Right? These are
Not
colonial education systems where a Ghanaian is taught more about British history than they know about Nigerian history. And Nigerians taught more about British history than they know about Ghanaian history. So more Nigerians would have traveled to London than they would have Accra. More Ghanaians would have gone to London than they would have Lagos. And these are 45-minute flights.
Yeah, you know, when you put it like that, the irony is so very apparent, you know. It's like, yeah, no, 100%. That was my educational experience. And I'll just interject slightly, my brother, and just add the fact, because I was on a panel the other day, and I was telling the other panel members that I had a whole secondary or high school education, and I didn't even know that they had slave ports along the coast where Africans were transported into the New World. I had to actually come over here to know that history, right? So yeah, there's a lot, you know, there's just ignorance can also be encouraged by omission. It's not even so much what they decide to brainwash you with, but it's also what they decide to make you ignorant of by omitting it out of your educational experience. So yeah, no, 100%.
So you leave, you're born in Ghana, you're walking around Ghana, you get transported to Nigeria, you get transported out of Nigeria, you come back to Ghana. How old are you when you get back to Ghana?
When I got back to Ghana, I would have been about 5 or 6.
Okay, so it was 5 or 6. You don't understand anything that's happening.
No.
Even when you're in Nigeria, you just feel like you're living life, right? I'm sure you made friends there and everything and what have you, right? So you get back to Ghana, but you have a different understanding of the world than the average Ghanaian, even at 5 years old, because you actually lived in Nigeria, right? So now you're growing up, you're going to the educational system of Ghana. If you can think back to the Dalian at 6 to 10 to 11 to 12, 13 years old, what are you noticing in your life that is preparing you for where you are today in terms of the training that you're getting, the misinformation that you may be getting? One of the things you talked about was the ports, the slave ports. You didn't even, the castles, the dungeons. What are you seeing as a 13-year-old child growing up in Ghana? Are you becoming politically aware? Are you becoming historically aware? Are you understanding how the world has interacted with your existence at this time? Or does it really hit you when you leave at 19 years old and go into London? Or are you already forming your identity as to who you became and who you are now?
Yeah, I would definitely say a few things, Brother Heru. First, in terms of identity formation, it would be an understanding of my skill sets and my abilities. Because one of the things that my mother would do regularly with myself is she would take time out of, let's say, once a week, where she would sit with myself, did it with my siblings as well, and try and encourage me to write. And you know, as an adult, when I look at my skill set in terms of communication, whether it's the written word or even how it translates to visual, I can see those foundations there. I know in my particularly early secondary education, they had this Canadian initiative where this woman used to have this a library complex where children could go and just read for free. And I would willingly go there with a few of my friends. I realized I had a love for language. And I think it was also pushed and furthered on a lot by my mother, because she would encourage me to get into these writing competitions. I remember once we had to write about Christopher Columbus, and this is one of the things that stays in my mind a lot, because I think I would have been about maybe 9, 10 thereabouts,
And
and
this
my
is in
mother.
Ghana.
Oh
This is
yeah,
in
this is in
Ghana.
Ghana. Yes, 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 yes.
You see, this is the example that I want people to know. Here we are in West Africa. A 9-year-old child is writing about Christopher Columbus.
Oh,
Very
absolutely.
interesting, but doesn't learn anything about really Ghanaian history too much, or Nigerian history, or Togo history, or Ivory Coast history, but we're writing about Christopher Columbus. So that says it all right there.
Oh, it is indeed. But you know what was what was the twist to it, and what made me love my mom so much, even still to now, because bless her memory, she's now in spirit, was she gave me an element of what Christopher Columbus actually did.
Yeah.
So my essay
Give you
wasn't
some
about Christopher.
context. She gave you
Oh
some
yes,
context. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Because even now, I vividly remember that my essay. There was a point where it said that Christopher Columbus had left and gone back to Portugal, and then when he came back, he realized the destruction that he had caused in the new world, as he had labeled it, from what they had done to the local people. And I apparently I won. I came. It was a global contest. I came 80 something or the other, and I was meant to be given a gold medal. So this gold medal, it was held by some Indian organization. I can't remember their name and what now, but this gold medal was shipped to Ghana. So I remember about 6 months later, we received this envelope, and I was getting very excited that wow, they actually picked my essay. I had won, da, da, da. But the envelope was empty. So what had happened, and was happening a lot with the Ghana Postal Service, is when your postage comes, there are people who actively try and inspect what is in your package and decide whether you received the package or not. So I received an empty envelope with the certificate to say I had won or come within the first 100, but then the gold-plated medallion or award itself was missing. You know, so this is be one of the reflections of, again, how the mismanagement of Ghana in particular was creating what I'll call unethical practices. You know, because it was very well known that especially around Christmas times and whatnot, you should ensure that you do not put certain packages filled with either money for your relatives from abroad, for those who were helping them, because during the postal process, you would never receive that money.
Right.
Someone would take it off your hands, you know. The other thing in this time period, Brother Heru, that was becoming very clear for me, because I lived in I had a very kind of interesting experience, because my mom was in the education system. I guess she was very clear on what the educational standards were.
Mhm.
So she tried very hard to ensure that we went into what were, you could call them semi-private schools.
Mhm.
A few of them were quite religious. So I grew up as a Catholic in the Catholic tradition. And where I used to live in a place called, well, the place actually had no name, because it was between a place they call Nima and a place called Asylum Down.
Mm.
Now, Nima proper is a slum. It's one of the, they call it zongo. A zongo is another word for, and when we talking a slum, we're talking about houses that are made from iron rods. It's not a proper structure. Yeah, this is how people would live. There's no running water, no toilet facilities. People were living in the roughest experience possible. So I lived in between this zongo or so-called slum and the area that was also relatively affluent. So I was kind of stuck in the middle.
Mhm.
And I was going to school where, we had children who were, some of them had parents abroad. So they had a more, I'll say, comfortable life. Yeah.
Sure.
I had classmates who had parents or relatives in the government. So their quality of life and existence was totally different to some of these children that I also used to play with in the Zongo, because the Zongo was within a walking distance. I could walk 10 minutes that way, I'll be in the Zongo.
Mhm.
Yep. Where some people had never seen a simple toilet bowl, a WC, what we call
Mhm.
that water container was a
Mhm.
luxury for them.
Right.
And then I'll walk 10 minutes this way and I will be with the current president of Ghana. They used to have this big estate. Basically,
Mhm.
it was from the colonial time. The house looked colonial. It had lots of land around it. And I used to play with the current president's niece. So you can see these two conflicting realms that I could see. And I was very aware of the fact that I existed somewhere in between this social class
Mhm.
disparity, really, because there were very rich people here who I would go to their house and be like, wow, look, they just brought this PlayStation or whatnot from the States for this boy.
Mhm.
He has all of this other things that I don't have. And then 10 minutes this way,
Mhm.
those friends will come to my house and see something as simple as a WC,
Mhm.
something you sit on to, relieve
Mhm.
yourself, and think I'm the affluent one.
Mhm.
So I could see that, yeah, there were these layers to society. And I think that really primed my mind for understanding social disparities
Mhm.
and the way society is, in a sense, engineered. So
Yeah.
that was really my foundational basis to understanding myself and how I fit within a social context.
Mhm.
You
Okay.
know?
So that's how you're making sense of the world around you in Ghana.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then a another thing happens to you that has to really rearrange your world is you now go to London,
Absolutely. Yes.
right? And it's
Yes.
a whole different thing now, right?
100%.
Where it's no longer, in a sense, you are Ghanaian, but now you're an African immigrant, right?
100%. Yes. Uh-huh.
Right?
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
those, and there may have been some Nigerians who felt a certain way about Ghanaians because of what's happening in their country. And there may be Ghanaians that felt a certain way about Nigerians. But now when we go to London, we're shopping in the same places to get the same yam, to get the same plantain, to get the same, and we're seen as African immigrants because now we are the other,
Right.
right? So
That's right.
talk about that experience.
Oh no, absolutely. So my experience in London, actually, one of the things that helped me when I first got to England was understanding that social disparity. Because for me, being brought to England, it was all this, the way the West sells itself into the African or Black imagination.
Yes.
It's just evil, straight up genius.
Yes.
So me coming, I'm thinking everywhere looks like the Buckingham Palace that you would see every time is the Queen's birthday,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole TV station is about the Queen, and
Mm-hmm.
she's in this golden carriage and this,
Mm-hmm.
that, and the third. Two, I end up in a place called Brixton, and Brixton at this time is
Mm-hmm.
it's literally a no-go area.
Right.
Brixton is at the time. Now Brixton is like so gentrified, it's beyond. It's like you could call it a middle class neighborhood now,
Mm-hmm.
because it's totally gentrified. But at the time when I got there in the late 90s, Brixton was a no-go area. You tell people you live in Brixton, everyone looks at you like, what kind of person is this? So
Right.
not only was I an African immigrant and I had to deal with that, what came with that label, but I was also living in a place where people were like, oh, okay,
Right.
yeah, let's stay away from this
Mm-hmm.
one.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens to me when I come to England and I live in Brixton is I have to go to school in the northwest part of London. So I actually don't go to school in South London.
Mm.
And so from there, when I'm telling people I'm from Brixton, some are even looking at me like, why are you in school then? Because from all that we hear of people in Brixton, all you're meant to be doing is either you're dealing drugs or you're stabbing people and you're robbing people.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm getting all these different labels thrown at
Mm-hmm.
me. But then I actually find some beautiful Pan-African experiences, because I remember I started bonding very tightly with a brother from St. Vincent. And it's from there that we just start to have this commonality
Right.
when
Right.
we don't know each other. We just happen
Yes.
to have the first work experience, because
Mm-hmm.
that was his first job in England as well. So,
Yes. And
we start to have this commonality of
mm-hmm.
just being Black. This is where the
It,
identity of Black starts coming in,
exactly. And for the
you
people
know?
who don't know, who've never been to England, Brixton is actually a very famous place. And it's a place where working class, former colonial subjects of the UK Empire, United Kingdom Empire, went to settle. And so when we talk about the African immigrant experience, it's not just African immigrants, it's Caribbean immigrants, right? So and this is the same thing in New York City is that what we find as Caribbean and African people is that we converge because we tend to like the same music and eat the same type of foods, right?
Absolutely.
So you can easily go into a Caribbean, for instance, in where I grew up in Chicago, all the Africans in the Caribbeans went to a Mexican store to get food, right?
Okay.
In the grocery, because they had all the tropical foods that we eat. They have the yam, so we would see each other there, rub shoulders with each other and get to know each other. And these places actually, in a counterintuitive sense, to go to England or to go to America, I've always said that they actually accelerate Pan-Africanism, right? Because you are now in the same location with other people of African descent from different locations of the world who have something in common, is that our existence, in a sense, is that our necks had the boots of England on it. Right? And
Yep,
we're now
yep,
in
very
England
deeply.
trying to, make a better life from the countries that we all come from. And so there becomes a lot of cross-pollination. And we start to realize that we share a lot of the same traits, the same culture, the same everything. And I'm sure, I mean, you're there in the 90s, all of the legendary reggae concerts in England happened in Brixton.
Oh,
I'm
100%.
sure there's,
Yep.
I'm sure there's a huge, because I'm somewhat of a reggae historian.
Okay.
And
Yes.
so I'm sure that, there's a lot of stories you have of reggae and dub music pumping in the neighborhood in Brixton. And, as a Ghanaian, you're meeting Jamaican friends and, like you said, your St. Vincent friend and all of this. And there's a certain type of forbidden aspect, but also a cool aspect where it's laying the foundation for a lot of London culture. The
100%.
cultural underpinnings of London that people actually cared about was coming out of Brixton. And even the punk era, they were getting a lot of their vibes from Brixton, right?
100%. Yes,
So, I mean, if
absolutely.
you can talk about that a little bit, that would be interesting, because I've never been to Brixton myself. I've never been to
Oh, okay.
England. So,
Okay. Yes.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. As you come from Ghana, you spent time in Nigeria, you're there now in England, you're meeting now other Africans from different parts of the world. And you're starting to get a sense of their history, your history. So just, I want to hear a little bit more about that.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. You know, there's just to kind of even add on top of that, I remember back then, the Jamaican greeting wagwan, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that was slowly building as a, yeah, you could call it a cultural archetype, to the degree where now in England, we had one politician, we had some riots, I think it was in 20, it might be 2016 or slightly less, in a place called Tottenham, which is in North London. And we had this ridiculous white historian come on TV, European historian to be more precise, saying that all these social unrest is due to the fact that they've allowed what he terms yardie culture to now dominate. And because you have Turkish children, you have English children, Irish children, who have, in a sense, it's it's exactly as you said, this cool culture, you know. And then we realize that it goes even beyond, because we have in the 50s and the 60s the biggest migration of Caribbean migrants, or rather British subjects, because they were not immigrants in the sense of the word. They were British subjects. They were part of the British culture, who come here to establish themselves. And as you said, a lot of the coolness from then comes all the way. They influence the punk era, and they even influence the style of dress, to now it's the standard greeting of any urban, urban in this sense, meaning
Mm-hmm.
people who live in cities,
Mm-hmm.
as a standard greeting. As I said, you have English boys, Irish boys, women, men, and Wagwan is now like a commonplace. You know, it does
Yeah.
almost like it doesn't belong to Jamaica anymore. You
Right.
know, so for me, as a young Ghanaian boy, I'm looking at all these expressions. You know, I'll walk down a road, for instance, like Cold Harbor Lane, and I'll see this a Jamaican man, and I can tell that he's who you identify as the bad man, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
because he's wearing this lovely white shirt that you can still see the Versace label hanging off. He's wearing these Versace glasses that you saw Biggie have in
Mm-hmm.
some of his early videos, and then he's wearing these pink trousers that are so tight with these white shoes. So there's a lot of color
Right.
in Brixton, yes, and this color is just a whole convergence of people who are living there together. We have this big Brixton market. As a Cold Harbor Lane is a very well known street in and part of British history. So for me, coming from Ghana, I just didn't want to come to England and be a Ghanaian in England. Do you understand? So then that means my whole circle and everybody that I know is Ghanaian, because sometimes some immigrants tend to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
to me, it was like, by having traveled all this way over here to just stay with all that I know,
Mm-hmm.
it's useful to broaden your perspective. So let me get to know other people. And as I said, this brother in St. Vincent, obviously we lost touch, but one of the other things that I bring from Ghana to here is this understanding of this social disparity. So I look around Brixton and I see, wow, okay, this part doesn't look like, for instance, when I go up north to go to college, because in college, I'm in a college in West London, and West London is now a very affluent area. So when I look at the way West London looks to how this housing estate I live on in Brixton look, I can see the same level of social differentiation.
Mm-hmm.
People know that I'm from Brixton. There's the automatic assumption that I'm involved in some level of crime. Yep, this just becomes automatic. Oh
Mm-hmm.
wow. And then I also start to notice that people in various parts of London don't move around. They just stay in that one locale. So I remember there was one girl who was like, "But how do you just come all the way from Brixton to come to college here?" But Brixton is only 45 minutes away. But this girl has grown up in the same, you won't even call Stonebridge. This is where this girl lived, a town. It's just like an area within a borough. She's lived there her whole life, has never even ventured into the next, should we say, neighboring town or area to it. She's just stayed in the same area for 18 years. has never even felt the need to jump on a bus and go 30 minutes out. So I wasn't built like that. For me, I kind of like to, it's in the experience that I learned. So I was going to East London, I was going further South London, obviously, I was going to school in West London. So I start to get a sense of what England, or London specifically, because England is a whole different something to London, looks like. And just looking at how Black culture and experience expresses itself. When I was that young, again, I had an experience of an entrapment with the police. And that this is again where I start to get a bit of understanding about the nature of the political structures and how they keep people in certain places. I worked. I worked hard. I wasn't a man on the road, so to speak. I'll finish college. I had one job that I would do, and then I used to work in the McDonald's, and I work in the McDonald's till about 2 o'clock in the morning. Then I would jump on a bus, and that bus will, because it's a nighttime bus, it would take about an hour and a half to take me back to Brixton. So I'll get back to Brixton around 3:30 in the morning. Then I have to sleep. Then I have to wake up around 8 o'clock in the morning, jump back on a bus, go to college and try and get an education. So there was a day when it was really cold in wintertime, and I'm walking along Cold Harbor Lane. Obviously, I'm aware that Cold Harbor Lane is known for many things, but I know I'm not involved in these things. So you just assume you're okay. Yeah, you're not involved in that. What's the point? So I see this European man standing in the corner having a cigarette. So I asked him, "Oh, can I have a roll up?" Because this is dead cold of winter, you kind of feel you want to smoke and get some kind of warmth. So he's like, "Yeah, here." He gives me the pack. Next minute, I see this big police van just pull up. So I'm seeing about 4 officers just jump out of this van, tell me, go up against the wall. And I'm fine with that because I know there's nothing untoward on my person. I'm not that level, because this is what's showing at the time, I guess, my own socio-political naivety. So they tell me, "Oh, we just spoke to him and he said you have some drugs on you, so we need to conduct a search." So now I'm looking at the guy and they let the guy walk off. So I'm thinking, but why am I the one you need to search if this man's telling you this? I didn't understand it. But clearly, this person was an undercover policeman whose job it is to just be there to try and catch young Black men who are supposedly drug dealers, So these guys subject me to a whole hour of just, again, random searching, even going beyond the boundaries that the law allows them to, So they eventually find a travel card, which is not mine. And then they said, "Okay, on the basis of this, we're going to have to detain you, blah, 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 find whatever."
What's a travel card?
It's a card that you need to travel on. So to be able to jump on a bus or a train,
oh,
you have to
okay,
buy
like a bus card or a transportation card. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And I had to, because I was a broke student, I met a very old man, sweat, all sorts dribbling from his mouth. He told me it was his card, sold me it because it had a lot of credit on it. So I bought it at a cheaper price. And that's how I used to travel. So because it's not mine, they said, "Okay, so 1 minute I'm being stopped on suspicion of apparently dealing drugs, to then ending up being detained for a travel card that is not mine." And again, as I said,
in England, the travel cards that has your name on it, it's associated with
yes,
oh, okay.
Because you can, if you buy it as in a, should we call it, let's say, a package deal, it's registered to your name.
Oh, okay.
So that in case you lose it, you can then get a reimbursement for it. Yeah, there's
or if they want to track you in some type of
oh
way.
well,
right, of course.
Absolutely, that's the whole point anyway.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Yeah. So I spent the weekend in the cell, and I'm very honest, because for me, I didn't even see that as a crime. I thought I was actually helping that man because he was a crackhead on the estate.
Right.
Before I came to England, I didn't know anything about crackheads. Number two, I didn't know anything about racism, because obviously growing up in Ghana, everybody you see is Black. Your teacher Black, your principal is Black, the head of police is Black. So this concept of racism, it didn't exist up here. I wasn't aware of it at all. But after that weekend, I was like, okay, you know what? Something isn't right here with what these people did. But hey, what can you do? And then there was also a very famous racial murder in England of a young man called Stephen Lawrence that happened in 1997. So this is roughly the same time that these things are happening to me. And I'm now starting to get a picture of, okay, you know what? There's also something else to living in this place that one needs to be mindful of. So yeah, this is how I kind of start to get an understanding of Pan-Africanism, the global kind of experience of Black people, because I'm meeting different Black people from different places and I'm getting along with them. And I've never met these people, you know, they're from different countries, they speak different, they have different accents, but I find that I'm gelling with them, almost like we're still family.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too that's very interesting as a Ghanaian, when you move to different places, is that a lot of people don't realize this, but Ghanaians get a lot of love just for being Ghanaians. And a lot of it has to do with Kwame Nkrumah, right?
I personally think it's all.
Like the moment you say Ghanaian to other people, people just accept you with open arms. They just love you. And it's a very interesting experience, you know, particularly when you meet a lot of older Africans and they find out that you're from Ghana. Ghana just has this great reputation of producing good people. And so I would imagine that probably happened in England as well, is that when people found out you're Ghanaian in a circle of other people from the diaspora, you probably were well received.
100%, no disagreement. And you know, Brother Heru, it actually also gets better, I believe, after, I'm trying to remember when I actually finished university. It's either 2004 or 2006, when Ghana does quite well in the World Cup. Because at this time I find myself in Cuba and I'm loved even more. Because at the time I used to, you know, from my design background, I used to make my own t-shirts. And I remember I made one with the Ghanaian flag on it, and everywhere I was, they were like, Ghana, all of this and that. And yeah, even as I grow up now, even more, I tell it to my alumni people, you only understand the value of that label Ghanaian when you're outside of Ghana, as opposed to when you're living within, you know? So yeah, no, I totally agree with you 100%. I believe it went a very long way to, I would say, the good treatment I received, you know?
Yeah, man. So you understand what's going on with your, you know, you have experience with the police, which is quite a common experience that many young African brothers have, who have basically an immigrant status, right? And then also a working class status that also affects your ability to navigate the police and law enforcement. And you know, I mean, you're always aware that you are the other and that this country is not your country, right? You're aware, and they make you aware. They let you know that it's not. And many of us resist that. And many of us, you know, try to assimilate into the culture, try to fit a square into a circle and a circle into a square. At what point do you say to yourself, I'm a Ghanaian, but my identity is African? Because when you are living in Ghana, what a lot of people don't realize, I'm saying this because I have all types of listeners listening to my podcast. A lot of them are American, and a lot of them are longing to reclaim their African identity, right? Particularly those in America where it's completely been stripped from their memory.
Yes.
What a lot of them don't realize is that many Africans do not have an African identity.
Yes.
They do not have a continental African identity. And to a large degree, many Ghanaians or Nigerians do not have a Nigerian identity. They do not have a Ghanaian identity. They have more of an Ashanti identity, an Achim identity, a Yoruba identity, an Igbo identity, a Hausa identity. They're more about their ethnic group than any type of national identity until they leave the country. Right. So tell me the different layers and how those layers get peeled away, and to the point where you say, I have more of an African identity, to the point where you become a man who does a documentary on a spiritual system, which is in its foundation an African spiritual system, but expressed through people living in the Caribbean, i.e. Haiti, right? As we start to talk about Vodou and your work, bringing out the awareness about Vodou and what it really means, and taking away the mysticism of what Vodou is and some of the misinformation and disinformation about Vodou. So do you remember the stages of you being, you know, because I don't know what ethnic group you're from. What ethnic group are you from?
I'm Asante, because I traced that through my mother's line. So
okay.
Yeah, I'm
so
an Asante.
So you're Asante, and we all know how Asantes feel about being Asante. You know,
Yeah,
they're hardcore. Asantes tend to be
well,
very hardcore.
but you see, brother Heru, for me, I never had that hardcoreness, in the sense, because I think, again, it all depends on the context within which your parents give you that identity. So for me, in my family, on my mother's side, there was a lot of strife between my mother herself and, if you want to call it, the extended family, because I remember when my grandmother passed, and this was right before I went into high school, the extended family appropriated aspects of my mother's inheritance, because they could do that through the traditional inheritance, if you want to call
customary
it system.
law, right?
Customary
yes. Laws, yes.
So obviously my mom felt aggrieved, and so she did not develop that relationship perhaps as much as she could have, and you know, for good or for bad, because you don't this is about how people treat you. So you really don't want to develop a relationship further that doesn't also enhance you back. So you know, there's no for me qualms with the fact that that didn't happen perhaps the way it should at all. However, what happens is, and speaking to your question, because I have to answer it in two different ways, because in terms of a spiritual consciousness, mine even started before I became aware that I was also Black. So, you know, speaking back to the nature of your question, in the sense that when you're within, let's say, a country, because these borders were not made by Africans, they're not, it's only, I'll say quite recently, but even then there's struggle. The only one who's managed to do that effectively, as we know it now, is Kagame of Rwanda. And that's because he's used the experience of conflict to now give the people he's governing over a uniform identity, much like in the way you find in Cuba, where everybody says they're Cuban, you know, and to a degree, they even want to then remove the African aspect of being Cuban, even though that can have certain repercussions for you. So within Africa, yes, you're absolutely right. Most people first will take their identity to their quote unquote tribe. I don't like using that word because we know it has a lot of
connotations to it. Yeah,
yes, absolutely.
That's why I use ethnic group.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yes. No. Absolutely. Exactly. Your community group or your ethnic group that you're from, because that gives you a sense of lineage.
Sure.
You know, and for some people, for lack or better, they hold on to that ethnic identity so much so they cannot understand that they've also been pulled in together with other groups, and for everybody to have the benefit of that forced collectiveness, it's better that you start to see where you can link. Rather, it starts to create clusters of people vying for power. So it's the perfect divide and rule strategy, if you ask me. You know, so again, as I said, for me, my mom never really encouraged this. You know, you are Santi, so for instance, don't get on with Evans, yeah, because the Ewes are a group which historically have been subjugated by the Asantes, as an example. Yeah. So you actually have nationalists who you know speak of warfare even to today, and some of these people are educated, so-called educated in Western systems of thought, where you would think that they would be able to see better, but you find that they regress to this ethnic group identity. But as I said, I've never had that, because I didn't spend maybe a lot of time in the village. I didn't know what this person is or that person is. So I just saw myself
You didn't grow up in Kumasi, did you? You grew up in Accra?
No, I grew up in Accra, and
Okay.
Accra is quite cosmopolitan because
Mhm.
really Accra belongs to the Ga people.
Right.
But in Accra, you find a mixture of all others because Accra is the center where
Right. Where
the
everyone
Europeans
converge, yeah.
Exactly. It's like the melting pot.
Right.
So interestingly enough as well, in Accra, and even still today in Ghana, most people speak Twi,
Yeah.
which is an Akan language, yeah, specifically Asante. So you then start to wonder, how exactly are these power dynamics orchestrated such that you have these disparities across the board? Because if you're in a place where is the Ghan's homeland, why are we speaking Twi? But then when you look into history and you look at the relationship that the Asantes managed to build with the British, again, you then come to find out why the Asante perhaps is an ethnic group that is more known than everybody else. Because the British wrote them into their history for the levels of treaties that they had and how they supported each other, you know, in their enterprise. Yeah. So for me, that identity, I didn't have it so much. But where I understood the Black identity was in when I came to England. And then I realized that, oh snap, my skin actually, there are people who are othering me because of nothing else but the shade of my skin.
Right.
Yeah. And that they're willing to kill people just for that. Because I came and I heard about this young brother called Stephen Lawrence. I believe he was about 17 when he was murdered in a place called Eltham. So I was thinking, why would somebody want to kill somebody just because of the shade of their skin? And Stephen Lawrence was a brown skinned brother. Do you know what I mean? So my darkness made him look light.
Right.
Did you understand? So these things then started going on in my mind. But in terms of my spiritual consciousness, as a teenager, this was in Ghana when I actually finished secondary school. I spent close to a year at home because I was waiting to either move on to university. I had to retake a couple of my exams. So I find myself at home a lot of the time. And I'm named after my grandmother because my name is Yao. I'm born on a Thursday. My grandmother was called Ya. Sorry, you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm Yao also.
Okay, yeah, there you go. So you see, fellow Thursday born.
Yeah.
So I find myself at home a lot, Brother Heru, right? And I'm thinking, you know what? I need opportunity because I feel a bit stuck now. I want to change my life. And at the time, one of the brothers that was a best friend of mine, he had been brought to Ghana from England because he was getting into a lot of trouble. So his mom had decided that he needed to stay in Ghana to reorientate his mentality somewhat. So he then went back because he's also finished high school. He goes back. So I'm there by myself a lot. And then I start to get this impression that I can ask my grandmother for assistance. Yes. So this is just a feeling and a sense I start to get. And it's also because this is part of my reading. And, you know, I mentioned my love of reading from a young age. And my mother gave me this book by a man called Norman Vincent Peale. It's called The Power of Positive Thinking. So as I'm reading this book, I come across a section where he talks about the fact that, let's say you want to do well in business. You should imagine the people who you admire the most in business, and you can imagine you sat with them around the table, and they give you the guidance you need to further yourself. So obviously at the time I didn't know anything much about self-help psychology and all these areas of psychology. So I say to myself, well, but you know, I can also speak to the spirit of my grandmother. Now remember, I've been brought up as a Catholic. So to even attempt that is supposedly some form of juju. Yeah, because this is one of the biggest things that colonialism has left in the mind of the African, that anything that is related to their cultural, spiritual framework is negative and needs to be stayed away from. But you know, I'm finding myself at home alone. My grandmother, I loved her to bits, and I'm thinking, okay, well, let me just try it anyway. So I decided I want to speak to my grandmother. But the thing is, nobody's ever taught me the traditional way to do any of that. So I say, okay, you know what? I've been going to church. I know that to pray to someone, or you know, God or Jesus, you have a candle, you light it. We go to mass on a Sunday, then you pray with the rosary. So I said, okay, why not? I'm going to try that. And then I'm going to write her a letter, as I found in this self-help psychology book. So this is my first experience of what I will later come to find and know as ritual practices within the African system. So, you know, I do the first attempt to communicate, and I feel a presence, and I feel a consciousness. So I say, okay, I'm gonna keep up with this because I felt her presence in my life. Do you know what I mean? So this is how my spiritual consciousness has always taken me from a teenager. So that one I've always developed that. So I've always had this understanding and gnosis that I have this spiritual connection with my grandmother that I can call upon anytime. So I'm in England as a teenager, and I'm already keeping these systems of veneration up. No, I've never had any training in any African spiritual tradition. It's just something that has come onto me, and I'm doing, and I'm seeing results of it. I'm having dreams, I'm having communications. So that has always been a part of my existence from I was 18, thereabout. Yes. But I'm in England. I now come to understand that there is this concept called race. I've now started reading and finding out the true history of Africans and why even people like myself, I found myself in England. Yeah. So a brother, I'm talking to a brother, early 2000 that I met in Ghana. His name is Kofi. He goes and joins at the time. They're known as the Nwabian Nation. They were quite big in England at the time. You know, the Nwabian Nation was going across the world with Malachi Z. York. So I remember I'm having a conversation with him because again, for me, it's about that intellectual curiosity. And you know, I'm still kind of quasi-religious. And I remember he asked me this question because I went to see him at his house. He said to me, you know, Dalian, you believe in God and obviously the European form of God. And you know, read the Bible like all Africans, like my mom, because Kofi's mom is he's born here, first generation British, but his mom is from Ghana. It's like, you know, all these things that when he came to Ghana, he could see, he was like, these things just are just systems of mental manipulation. So, you know, I tried to debate him because I'm not religious, but it's how I've been trained. I've gone to the school, I've been baptized, I've received my Holy Communion or all of these other rituals that
and you at the time identify as Catholic.
I didn't identify necessarily because once I got here, I never went to church. So we're talking, I'm in England about a year or two now, and I've never felt the need to go to church. And the reason I never felt the need to go to church, Brother Heru, was when I was in primary and secondary school, especially, yeah, every Friday you're encouraged to go and repent, as they call it, where you go and you tell the priest your confessions. So even as a young child, because I was quite lively in the way that I came to the realization that what I was being given every Friday was an exit pass. I wasn't being held accountable for my actions because I would go and tell the priest, you know, obviously as a child, maybe I took somebody's lunch or, you know, I hit somebody, and I'll just be every week I would come and tell him all these quote unquote bad things. And he'd just tell me, oh, go and do 10 Hail Marys, 5 Our Fathers, and it's okay. So I started realizing that I could do anything I wanted really and just come and sit down every Friday and pretend to be sorry. And once I said those prayers, I had a clean slate to begin again. So there was no connection deep on a deep level. But what I started getting from my grandmother now, that was totally different. You know, I started holding myself more accountable. Yes, I knew that I couldn't come here and just say all these things just for the sake of saying them. There was a deep reverence about that experience.
But at the time, though, as a Ghanaian, I'm going to interrogate this a little further because
go ahead.
I know how Ghanaians are. In the true test of what you really believe is when an elder Ghanaian asks you, what church do you go to? Or what have you, you know, or they start talking to you about Jesus and, you know, let's pray in the name of Jesus.
Right.
And your response Your
Right.
response is indicative of where you stand at that
Yes.
moment, because that's a defining moment. And a lot of
Absolutely.
people won't be able to understand what I'm saying, but when a Ghanaian elder starts talking to you about, yeah, call, sorry, let's go, you know, let's go to church and this type, you know, what is the stance that you go along with it? Do you say, oh, I'm not into this? Because when you say I'm not into this, there's a whole lot of other conversation that comes in, right? Are you a devil worshiper? That type of thing. Oh, you don't believe in God, you know. So
I love that you've actually asked that question, and the interview gives a lot of substance. Absolutely, brother. I chose the second option because I started saying that I don't believe in Catholicism anymore, or even just the Christian religion. And guess what? Because then within a year of living here, my own auntie who I was here living with said she couldn't have me in the house anymore.
Yes.
Because I wasn't coming to church.
Yes, I know. I know.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right.
Yes, because that's the true test of where you stand on these things, is when you start interacting with other Ghanaians, particularly those who are your elders, and what you say to them when it comes to these things.
Yes. Oh, no, they didn't like the response. My auntie especially didn't. So she kicked me out. And I had to, again, this is why I find myself literally living on the streets to a degree, because now I have to not just pay for my school fees, because at this point I'm still being considered an international student, so I'm paying a bit more than the average. I also now have to be able to afford a place to live and pay rent and all these things. And you can't be working on a minimum wage job and still affording these things. Did you understand? So this is why I get introduced to an older cousin of mine, and he also introduces me to different ways of living. You know, as an older person who's been here for much longer. Yeah, that stance got me into a lot of trouble, because, as I said, Brother Heru, it was my grandmother. I was acutely aware of this, the sense that it was the spirit of my grandmother who was opening doors for me. I'll give you one of the clearest examples where this became clear to me. So I first came to England for about 6 months, and I did some work, so I saved up money to pay for my college, right? So when I went back to Ghana to then apply for the student visa to come, the night before, I have a dream, and the dream tells me when you go to the interview, you will pass through. Now, the interesting thing is, my mom had already been told that no, because we had a family friend who worked at the British Embassy, a Brazilian lady. And she said, nah, your son, even though he's saved enough money for the school, he doesn't have any money for living expenses. So you're not going to give him the visa. I said to my mom, no, I'm going to go anyway. So you see, like how I'm sitting here talking to you on the Zoom, it's like I could see the words yes on the woman who's interviewing me's forehead. And I finished the interview, Brother Heru, and they give me the visa. Yeah. So I'm having these experiences as a teenager. So now you can't tell me that church has more validity and influence than, because what I'm doing, I'm experiencing its outcomes.
So when you are facing these challenging moments, and you're, you know, basically getting a roadmap as to how you should move, you're attributing that to your grandmother in a sense of her being a guide to you, or what are you attributing? Because
absolutely,
because on the flip side of that, those who worship Jesus would then attribute their good fortune to Jesus loving them. Right?
Absolutely.
So how are you making sense of that at the time?
Well, I'm making sense of it at the time because, first of all, I'm having it in the dreams. So before I'm going to this interview, I'm seeing a plane that is flying up again. Yes. As I've returned back to Ghana, and these times I'm about 2-3 years in of understanding that every Thursday I will sit with myself in a space. I will light a candle. I will mentally imagine myself having this conversation with my grandmother and having a conversation as to how to move. So yes, I won't fault anyone who says, you know, maybe their good fortune comes from Jesus, because that's all they know.
Right,
and
or Allah, or
exactly
anything else.
I will actually segue off slightly and come back to this, Brother Heru. Do bring me back if I go off. So there's the brother George Washington Carver, very well-known inventor, yeah? Now, George Washington Carver comes from a tradition where he invents so many things. He's now an icon. And he claims that for him, he just got this impression that at dawn every day, he was supposed to walk into nature. And when he walked into nature, the plants would speak to him. This is how he came to know the secrets that he transformed into empirical scientific knowledge. And because he was an enslaved African, he said that knowledge comes from Jesus, because the only tradition he knows was Jesus too. However, Brother Heru, you and I both know there's no Christian tradition that tells you you can walk into nature and the plants will speak to you. They call that heathenism.
Yeah,
it's
or they
paganism.
Call it, yes, they call it animism, right?
Thank you very much. Yes. So we know George Washington Carver
or witchcraft. Let's just call it what they really call it. They call it witchcraft. That's what they call it. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So this brother is having these experiences that no other Christian pastor is having, and he's able to transfer that knowledge into what we call empirical scientific inventions. Right? But his modality is totally the same as an African traditional priest would do. There's no Christian priest that does that. But this is the experience he was doing, and he was attributing it that way. So this is why I'm saying that I won't fault anyone who says that. For me, what I do know is when I was doing my Jesus prayers, I wasn't really going anywhere. When I actually actively took on this once a week on a Thursday, because that's the day I was born, I made this effort to sit with the memory of my grandmother in mind. It started translating into guidance, things like dreams, certain symbols I would see and I would know. As an example, this woman who worked at the British Embassy told my mom categorically the amount of money in my account was not going to be sufficient for me to be given a visa. I told my mom, let's still go for it, because I know what I had seen and I did get given it. So I'm not claiming anything is miraculous in that sense, but even to today, brother, we know what we call epigenetic memory inheritance. Yes. So we now have the standard science now coming out with concepts and labels to describe what I've experienced. Yes, because for me, it was that memory that was feeding into me on how I should move forward. And it fed into my life many times and has been since then, brother, you know. So go on.
What you've done is you've given me the foundation of how you got into studying and embracing Vodou.
Absolutely.
As a Ghanaian, right? Because you're starting out with this understanding of the interaction of spirit mediums and nature and these things, which is your own form of voodoo.
100%.
Right? Without having a name, right?
Exactly.
But most of us are particularly brought up in African households. Voodoo is associated with the devil, right? That you're doing something completely evil. So to meet a Ghanaian who's wearing a voodoo t-shirt is to meet a very rare person. And a lot of people, you know, would take it for granted to see you in a voodoo t-shirt. Would be me coming from an African household and living in that environment. You know, imagine going to a Ghanaian meeting with a voodoo t-shirt.
Oh,
you know? Yeah, I mean, a lot of people would just take it for granted and you know, who don't understand Ghanaian culture, but it's a big deal. It's a huge deal. And so there had to be something profound that happened in your understanding to be able to embrace voodoo openly and unapologetically as a Ghanaian. 100%. It doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen. Because everything in Ghanaian society discourages you from embracing voodoo of all things. Of all things, it would be the last thing that a person would embrace in a Ghanaian culture, because we've been trained. But what's so interesting, and we're going to get to this, is that voodoo largely is a form of, particularly practiced in Haiti, is a form of what they call African syncretism, which all Africans actually practice, whether they know it or not. There is no Ghanaian who believes in Jesus and all those things who still does not engage in ancestral veneration in some way or another.
Say it again.
right?
100%. Yep.
Right? And even when the
Absolutely. Yep.
going gets rough, they will still go see the fetish priest that they call the fetish, the fetish priest or the so-called witch doctor or
Yes. Oxymoron, that.
yeah, they will go and when the going gets rough,
Yep.
they will go and as they call it, go get their a draw. They'll go get
Yeah.
it.
Oh yeah.
Right? As much
100.
as they believe in their Jesus, even the pastors, even the priests, even these people, there's still African syncretism that is involved in those who are still staunch supporters of Orthodox Christianity, right? So
Exactly.
when we look at the development, it's very interesting because you come from a Catholic background, right? Whereas most, this is very interesting because most Ghanaians are Presbyterians, which is just Anglican. It means
Right.
Anglican,
Right.
which is the Church of England. And the Church of
Exactly.
England separated from the Catholic Church because of a
100.
divorce that Henry VIII needed, right? So
Yeah.
your life is
Exactly.
actually very interesting because
Thank you.
because in terms of the history, the average Ghanaian is not Catholic. The average Ghanaian is Presbyterian, which is literally the enemy of the Catholics based on the historical progression of
Right.
what happened with Christianity, right? The
Yes.
Church of England broke away from the Pope, the head of Rome. They broke away for political reasons. And the fact that you are Catholic actually, in a lot of ways, can prepare you for voodoo better than if you're actually Presbyterian because of the fact of the luau's and the saints that they use in voodoo theology by using Catholic saints to cover for African deities, right? So it's very interesting because you are primed for it more than the average Ghanaian as someone who was trained in Catholicism, right? So I mean, it's very interesting. Like listening to your story, that's why I ask people their story, and it almost becomes, in some ways, prophetic. The lives that we end up living, as informed by history and as a metaphor, right? That someone who is an African who is trained in Catholicism, who starts questioning Catholicism and gets into spirituality, is actually an individual story that reflects the collective story of the development of voodoo.
Bless you, brother. Listen, no one has stranded that together as beautifully and succinctly as you. And you know why I love what you said was, for me now, even reflecting on it, as I said, at the time, I didn't know there was something called Santeria. Again, I didn't even know there was something called Vodou in the diaspora. But then as I grew up and we started our research and started putting our body of scholastic work together, I now see myself as a teenager sitting down with that piece of paper, writing this down, using the same Catholic modality, to bridge that African expression. And I said, wow. And nobody taught me this. I just went with the feeling. So yeah, no, thank you very much for reaffirming that for me. Absolutely 100.
And let me tell you what else is interesting. It goes back to our conversation that Africans, we don't know each other. And it's in the sense that Ghanaians don't know much about Nigerian history. Nigerians don't know much about Ghanaian history. And even further, Ghanaians know nothing of Benin history. Right?
Yes,
partly because
absolutely.
it's French speaking. But this is the origin and the birthplace of voodoo.
Right, exactly.
Right? And what's very interesting is that from what I'm getting from your film and the people that you had speaking in it, you're finding the locality of voodoo through the expression of Haitians who have a different expression of voodoo because of slavery than people from Benin, where they had to hide their voodoo expression by using Catholic saints as camouflage.
The way you've said that, I love that, by using them as camouflage. 100%. That's the historical record, brother.
Right.
Yes, indeed.
And what might be interesting is that I wonder if you were exposed to the Benin version of voodoo, it would have spoken to you as strong as the Haitian version of voodoo, just because of the fact that you had the foundation of the Catholic form of religion.
Right.
right? Because once you understand these Catholic saints from the Roman point of view, and then you start understanding a deeper meaning from the Haitian point of view, it allows you to embrace voodoo even better, right? Because you
Absolutely.
have
Yes.
that Catholic, which is most Haitians, as they say, they will say that in Haiti, 80% of the people are Catholic and 100% are voodoo.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and you know, it's funny. It's exactly also what you said about the just the reality of the Ghanaian context, that when the going gets tough, they find themselves back where, in that medicine person's house,
Right.
looking for a draw.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. They recognize his power, and in
Yeah.
some cases, that's what they even fear. You know,
Mhm.
J.J. Rollins, the president, just recently deposed. One of the things he always used to advocate for, Brother Heru, he said it, my mom said it, other people echoed it, that if our judicial systems were built on having to swear our oaths on our traditional deities, the whole of Africa will be a lot more accountable than what it is now. Because I believe most people, and we all know it, are like me when I was a teenager. Because you know, you can say anything you want and then end up on a Friday confessing to something that you feel no remorse for, and then feeling convinced that you've been absolved of all responsibility for the negativity you did to another. You go back and do it again, because your sense of self accountability has been given to another. Do you understand? So you
Yeah.
don't need to take any accountability for yourself anymore.
Right, right. So
No,
even in terms
definitely.
of personal development, my problem that I had with along the lines of what you're saying, which would be a very interesting part of the conversation too, is that when you do an analysis of Christianity, one of my critiques of Christianity is that it does not teach personal responsibility because it's based on third-party reconciliation,
Wow.
right? And
Okay, yeah, yeah.
third-party reconciliation is simply, I offend you, but I go and apologize to Jesus,
Yes.
right? The Jesus
Right.
is here to absolve your sins. So instead of me going to seek forgiveness from you, I actually go and I beg forgiveness from a third party, right? It's a third party
Yeah.
reconciliation, which is also the metaphor of the story of Jesus, which is basically third party reconciliation. Jesus died for your sins, not
Right.
his. He died for
Yes.
your sins. So he took
Yes.
responsibility for your sins. So how does that teach responsibility when you can rely on someone to actually serve your sentence for you
I love how you break
and
stuff
serve
down,
your
you know.
punishment for you?
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't teach responsibility. It
No.
doesn't, because you can just put it on Jesus. And then the other side of it too, from a practical colonial administration point of view, Catholicism is actually very important because it's part of the military wing of every colonial administration, because it's literally a spy operation, right? Once you can get people to report their quote unquote sins to a priest who is associated with the colonial administration, if the people who are so-called slaves are planning a revolt and they hear thou shalt not kill, the slave or the person who's been enslaved who feels guilty will now go and confess on a Friday to the priest who literally is the officer, the MI5 or CIA officer who gets a confession without having to torture.
Brother Heru, you're dropping bombs. Please don't stop. It
Right?
is so astute what you're saying. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, so these are the problems that I've had with it, because I look at these things and I see how it has practical applications and implications in the world, right? So I couldn't participate in those things because I could see very clearly. I mean, what other system could you get people who you are oppressing to literally tell you what they're planning?
Yeah.
Without you
No.
having to capture them and put them through a torture process or interrogation? People are volunteering information to you by religious edict.
Absolutely. I just, you know, it's there, but as you exactly as you said, you know, and you said that your conversations end up being prophetic because you're now reaffirming a lot of things that as obvious, you know, as they say, some things are in plain view, but we can't see it. But the manner in which you formulated that and presented that, it makes it even more so clearer. Do you
Yeah,
know
I
what I mean?
mean,
And I relate it to my
yeah,
experience.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was actually a very expeditious way for Rome to take over the world and the children of Rome, because all of these countries are literally spawns of Rome. England, I mean, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to read Julius Caesar's diaries, but
Okay, no.
yeah, so it would be very interesting for you to read it and for all Africans to read it, because Julius Caesar conquered England.
Mm-hmm.
He brought civilization to England, and what he said about the English when he first met them, the Saxons and the Britons and the Welsh, all these people, he was so appalled at their lack of civilization and their illiteracy that he didn't even feel that they were fit to be slaves.
Yeah.
He says this on his conquest of the British Isles. It's a very important document for people to read. And so then the development of the Catholic Church, right? The domes and the basilicas and all of that, they're thinking of how they can conquer the world. And what better way to conquer the world when you have a religious system that encourages people to snitch on themselves.
True indeed. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
It's actually, I mean, if you had law enforcement and you asked them, what is one of the things that we would love to have? They would love to have a pill that they could give people where the people would just tell you the truth
100%.
and snitch on themselves.
Yeah.
Right? And religion is that drug. And the Catholic Church is that drug.
Yeah.
If you can Catholicize everybody, you'll be able to conquer them and maintain your power so much quicker, because anything that people are going to do that's untoward towards committing a quote unquote sin will be reported. And actually, that's what happened with a lot of the slave revolts in the United States, was the ones that weren't successful at all, and none of them were fully successful towards the end goal. It always had someone snitching who felt bad that they were doing something against the doctrine of going to heaven.
That's right.
Right? So they would report, they would go straight to the priest and they would say, hey, I feel so bad about what we're planning to do. We're planning to kill the slave master on Friday or on Saturday. So of course the priest says, you've been absolved, my son, and this and that, or maybe they even hold you in the church, and then they go and tell the military wing, because no missionaries existed without a military wing.
Oh, 100%.
They had to be supported by the military of the country that they were coming with. So we understand that this was all, it helps people in land grabs, right? And those of us who can see it, we can see it. And that's why having your own understanding of spirituality, or that which is unseen, which is all human beings have that question, where did we come from? And where do we go after we die? That is the main philosophical questions that all human beings ask themselves in all cultures and all walks of life. But if you have something that does not serve your liberation, you will always be a snitch against yourself and your people.
100%.
Right?
Straight to that. That's
right?
a beautiful exposition.
So, and that 100%. Brings us to Vodou, which Vodou literally was a liberation tool and what I call an anti-snitch tool. Why do I call 100%. It an anti-snitch tool? It takes you away from Catholicism. You are no longer confessing to the priest. And the way we know that Vodou was an anti-snitch tool is the declaration by Boukman Duty at Bwakaiman. That we must absolve and we must erase the gods of Europeans from our minds.
That's right.
Right?
Absolutely.
Because he understood that there can be no revolt if your people are programmed to snitch according to religious edict. So you got to get rid of that first.
100%. Yep.
You got to get rid of that first, and you have to replace it with something else. So you're able to now worship, because African people, we love to worship. There's something about us. It just is. You're not going to get rid of it.
Brother, it's our ashe. It's our ashe. It's our energy. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So they say, okay, you have a European saint that we have, but we're going to use that saint as camouflage for our own Luas, which is the African spirits, the African deities that represent certain principles and will guide us and what have you. So the slave master thinks that we're praying to the saint, but we're actually praying to an African deity. And we will never go now to this priest to reveal what it is that we're doing, because our religion is actually a religion of subterfuge.
That's right. Absolutely. Yes.
Right? Which is necessary for a liberation theology.
100%. 100%.
Right?
Yes,
so
indeed.
A lot of people think that voodoo is about having a doll and sticking a pin in a doll and making someone and controlling someone, but they don't understand, particularly in the Haitian context, its importance in breaking literally lines of espionage.
100%. Yeah, no, it's as I said, the manner in which you've explained that, it's 100% beautiful, brother. I just love it. Yeah, no, 100. And the fact that you even see that the ceremony at Boakai, man, had to have an oath. Yeah, there was something that bonded everyone. That again includes ashe. In this case, the ashe from the blood of a pig, whereby everyone knows they've now bought into that unity. That no one then you've actually now put this idea of confessions into a totally different light, because I only saw it mainly as that expression of religiosity, but where you've extended it to now, it's everything an intelligence service needs, because again, we know the Catholic Church still to today has a paramilitary wing, you know, and it funds it just as any country funds its military budgets, you know. So yeah, thank you for that. I love it. I love your exposition.
And the thing is that the languages of Western Europe are referred to as Romance languages. Okay. Which comes from Rome. Yes, Romance absolutely. Languages, they were all conquered by Rome. They would not have stuck if they did not accept Catholicism. The reason is that Catholicism makes it easier for you to manage a police state.
Right, yes, absolutely.
Right? So we have what we have today. Of course. You could not have a police state of slavery in Haiti coexisting with sincere Catholicism, because every plan that you make will be reported by the people who were supposed to actually get their liberation. You could not have 1804 happen where a bunch of people who were enslaved declare their liberation and actually win a military campaign if they are sincere Catholics. Right. Because every move that they're making would have been reported to a Catholic priest 100%. Who was on the side of the enslavers. Right? So the development of voodoo was actually necessary. And so imagine that you are someone, imagine me and you say, we don't like this slavery thing, we need to get out of it. What are the things that are necessary for us to do militarily to get out of it? Well, we're going to have some type of weapons. We're going to have military training, but we have to deal with the intelligence gathering problem. Yes. Which means that we have to deal with the question of Catholicism and this question of voluntary, happy confessions. Right? Most confessions are done under duress. In Catholicism, people are trained to happily confess.
You say anything and everything, you know. My own experience, I'm going off.
Of course. Of course. So you could not have had the Haitian Revolution in a land of sincere African Catholics, because the military campaign would have never worked. These seminal battles, like you know, we're just getting to know each other, but I've been to Haiti. I've spent time in Haiti, and studying the Haitian Revolution was something that's very important to me. And so people who want to, because as you can see, we're about to segue into Haiti.
Yes,
we're about to get into this because it's a very important part of the conversation. And so for people to know, if you want to know more about what we're about to talk about, there are two books that I read that are seminal, which is The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James, and also The Irritated Genie by Dr. Jacob Carruthers. These are books that will, for those watching, will inform you better about what we're about to talk about. We can't get into everything, but if you want to know about this, which I believe every person of African descent, no matter where you are on this planet, you need to know about the Haitian Revolution and you need to study the Haitian Revolution. It's very important.
Absolutely. And brother, if I can just add one more book by
Yes.
the brother Dr. Wade Nobles, Haiti's Unfinished Revolution. I think is a must because it also gets people to start to think of the social construct. You see the manner in which you've explained confessions to me, whereby, as I said, I saw that solely as a religious tool, but then you've just put it in the context of a intelligence gathering operation. What you've created for me there is what psychologists will call a mimetic archetype of sorts, because you've shown me that it's actually, something totally different. And it's all depending on how we frame it within the mind. So yeah, no, I'm happy to go into the segue, but could you give me just literally 5 while I...
Yes, absolutely. I'll press pause and then we'll continue.
Yes. Oh, Brother Heru, you're muted.
Okay, we're back. So at what point, now you have your personal, because it seems as if you're doing your personal spiritual work in terms of understanding how the world operates for you and your benefit. At what point do you get into Vodou in terms of your inquiry into Vodou?
So I would say the point where there was that total, I would say, break with any form of Abrahamic expression of religion would be when my friend in the Nubian nation at the time, having a debate, says to me, but we take for granted a lot of the stories you read about in the Bible. So if this guy that they call God lives in this place called heaven, that means for him to be able to live in the place called heaven, that means somebody's bigger had to create heaven for this God to live in it. That must mean that there's something beyond this concept of God. And I had never considered that. So going home that day, and I remember this again, I was on a train going back to, I was coming from North London now, going to South London where I live in Brixton. So it weighed on my head, Brother Heru, it almost, it's one of these things that the best way I can describe it is like an awakening moment, because even reality as I'm perceiving it looks like it's almost like it starts to wave itself. So I'm sitting there thinking, wow, this is kind of profound. So I go home and then it just spurs on the knowledge of reading. Yeah. So I start to immerse myself in a lot of historical, religious, and political readings. And this is where, again, my understanding of Blackness, yes, Black struggles across the world develops. So fast forward to about early 2009, I've finished university now. I have a couple of degrees. I'm still keeping up my practice with my grandmother. It's progressed somewhat because I've now learned about expressions, African spiritual expressions in the diaspora. So I'm no longer using the rosary anymore, because I'm like, that there is one of the archetypes, is one of the camouflage aspects. Now we're actually working with, at that time I had met a Dagara initiated elder here in London. So I had gone to some of their classes. I immersed myself in Afrocentric events. I remember at the time Dr. Marimba Annie also came here. I read her book. Don't let the
let the circle be unbroken.
Unbroken, yes. So I start to understand a lot of even what I've just been doing as a matter of experience and feeling. It starts to give me context, and it starts to affirm for me that I'm actually following my spirit and that I'm on a right path. So I start now to see myself in connection with other African/Black people. So I meet my future wife at the time, Verona, and we're on a similar consciousness. She's come from the new age, you know, because she grew up in a home where, luckily for her, they weren't really enforcing going to church per se. She's Jamaican, of Jamaican heritage. So she comes into new age, philosophy, if you want, where she's also just looking for a liberating practice of spirituality rather than a religious dogmatic one. You know, at the time, I had studied Islam. I had then moved into Buddhism. I was actually a somewhat of a practicing Buddhist, where again, when I was first introduced to the idea of a puja, which is basically a ritual, usually two ancestral figures, I said to myself, but this is what I've been doing every Thursday and at that point on Sunday to my grandmother. So I'm thinking, but where is the full African expression for me? You know, Verona is also thinking, where is the full expression of a Black-centered spiritual practice? So we meet together. She's a video producer. At the time, I was teaching in an educational institution. So we decided to say, why don't we pull our skills together and really research it and create an educational piece from? Because what both of us have been searching differently, we do not have it as one codified body of knowledge. You know, in the same way you can go to a church and be taught all the principles of Christianity, or you can go to a mosque and understand the 5 pillars of Islam. So we then start to put a call out to create a documentary film. That documentary film was called Ancestral Voices, Esoteric African Knowledge. So this is our first research into African spirituality proper. We get to interview Ifa initiates. We get to go to Ghana to interview actual Okomfos. Yeah, so we go, and one of the people we end up interviewing is a direct descendant of Okomfo-Anokye. And just for your viewers to understand who Okomfo-Anokye is a traditional priest or medicine person who is credited with bringing down this artifact the Asantes have called the golden stool. And it's the golden stool that unites the Asante in particular as a unit, a cohesive unit, yeah, of people. And the British fight with them over 100 years of warfare, trying to just defeat the Asante. Because at one point they want that golden stool because they realize it creates a bond that they can't break. Yeah, so this is where you get people, figures in history like Ya Santua, who's one of the first female warriors, well renowned for her military prowess, because she fights against the British and is successful to some degree. Well, to the degree that they have to put her in history. You know, she put up an effective resistance. So myself and my wife put together this documentary film, Ancestral Voices, Esoteric African Knowledge. The film starts, it does well, you know, because people are like, yes, you know, finally we're getting some understanding of what African spirituality is and looks like, and we need our own expressions. But then we start to get questions along the lines of, okay, so, you know, your documentary is really thought-provoking. It's changed my understanding of, it's not so much witchcraft anymore, you know. But then now, I actually don't know what to do. You know, what does it look like in practice? Because I'm no longer going to church. I'm no longer going to the mosque. What do I do? So then that begins another 7-year research into looking at what an African spiritual system looks like as a system. Yes. So we travel to Haiti.
So you're looking for the common threads at this point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because one of the things we start to realize, Brother Heru, is what we can call or use the umbrella term African spirituality, or even in some cases, some people might use the word Vodou. If you look in the Akan system as an example, you won't find it not far removed at all from, let's say, the Ghana system or the Benin system. So, you know, in the Benin system and the Haitian Vodou system, as you correctly said, what they might call the Loa or the forces of nature, in the Yoruba system, they call that the Orisha. Yes. In the Akan system, they call that Abosom. If you go into the Asian Kemetic system, they call these same elemental forces the Neter or the Neteru. So we start to make connections from Asian Africa into present day Africa, and as well as how it goes into the diaspora and attains these varied expressions like Haitian Vodou, like Brazilian Candomblé, or Cuban Santeria. Because we find that, as you correctly said, the Africans then syncretize it, obviously disguise it with the Catholicism, so they're allowed to retain these esoteric understandings. Yeah, and it takes us 7 years to create a systemic look at African spirituality as a system, as we find it in Asian Kemet, as we find it in the diaspora in the various systems, and as we find it on the continent. And that film was Ancestral Voices, Spirit is Eternal. So this is my foundation into African spirituality proper. Yeah. And then following that, that's when this film was born, Vodou, Theology of Liberation. Because as I'm filming for Ancestral Voices, Spirit is Eternal, I meet a lady by the name of Mambo Doherty. At the time, she was a Haitian initiate. She's now a queen mother in Benin. She's married to the highest one of their top royalty. Yeah, she's up there now. And she uses the word. She's the one that puts me on the practicality of what we can loosely call voodoo or African spirituality. Because she, like you've just done for me today, she contextualizes it as a system of liberation and shows me how it becomes a system of liberation, not just an expression of, religiosity because we like to worship, because we have it in our spirit. And yeah, based on her scholarship, we also get to interview the Haitian historian, Professor Bayina Bello, or Mama Bello, as she's affectionately called. We have some heavyweight scholars like Professor James Smalls in that documentary, and we managed to put together a systemic look at what African spirituality or voodoo or any other name that we call it among the various ethnic tribes looks like. Yeah. So this is my or our initiation into voodoo proper.
Okay. You said a lot, and I wanted to just get into some. No, it was good. It was very good because I want our audience to understand that the people I have on this show are people who've thought about things very clearly, and the whole point of this podcast is to introduce people to the world that people are not aware of, but who have made profound impacts and have some serious insight towards where we need to go as a people, right? Because it's a given that our people are going to be into spirituality, right? I don't consider myself much of a spiritual person to the extent that you may or other people may. However, we all want the same thing, is that we want liberation for our people worldwide, for self-determination. And I know that we have to address the spirituality question because that's who we are as a people. There's no way around it. And when we talk about the foundation of our people, there is no story of African people without looking at our spiritual systems, right? As you rightly pointed out, the Neteru coming from ancient Kemet, which is our best recorded, what they call a techno-complex civilization, right? A civilization where the proof is there of a high technology, an advanced civilization dealing with math and science, but also dealing with spiritual elements, where we talk about the Neteru that actually not only tell a story, but they're figuring out a lot of the stories actually are metaphors for scientific theories. So there's books, I don't know if you're familiar with books by Laird Scranton and John Anthony West, that look at the stories of the Neteru is actually explaining string theory in physics.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. Yes. And the fact that you look for the common strings in modern day African spirituality, and also trace it back to our history, you know, looking at ancient Kemet. So for instance, there's questions about where Ghanaians come from, the migration of Africans. And so my uncle or my grand uncle wrote a book, a very well-known book called The History of the Akan People, written by J.B. Dankwa.
Yes,
And
that's right.
And in it, he talks about how the Akan people descended from the ancient Egyptians, right? And he talks about the dress, how we wear the cloth, you know, we fran tuma, we wear it around us. And that's exactly what the ancient Egyptians, you'll see pictures or steles of us doing it. And then when you start looking at language, what's very interesting, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but since you're a Twi speaker, you will, and a Khan speaker, you will love this. So we all know the story of Asar, right? And for those who don't know, Asar, the Asarian resurrection is really the oldest story of resurrection, of a resurrected being, and the quote unquote religion or the spiritual system of the Egyptian or the Kemetic society. Those who built the pyramids was centered around the story of Asar, Aset, and Heru. The Europeans know it as Osiris, Isis, and Horus. And the story of Asar is that he was a king, and this is for the listeners, of course, and we're gonna get to something that you will really like. We're gonna get to a point that you're gonna really like. If you haven't heard it before, you'll really like it. Okay. So the story of Asar is that he's the first resurrected being. He's a king who actually taught agriculture. He's the first teacher of agriculture. He's the resurrected being and the first idea of religion within the Nile River civilizations. So what's very interesting is that that is actually reflected in the Akan language. And many Akan speakers don't even know it. They'll fight against it because they're so Christianized that they don't even realize that their language reveals what the true belief of their ancestors are. So for instance, the root word, many of the words in the Akan language that represent religion, fields, agriculture, actually have to do with Asar. For instance, Asar was the first resurrected being. He rose when Isis, Aset, found his body and body pieces that had been, you know, strewn to different parts of the world from Set, his evil brother, from which we get the word Satan. She puts the pieces together. She's his wife. It's actually the first love story told, right? Yeah. Her husband is killed by her evil brother, by the evil brother Set, and his pieces are strewn around the world, and then she puts the pieces together, and his spirit comes together, impregnates her. That is the first story of Immaculate Conception. And then the child is born, who then avenges his father. That child is Heru or Horus. And what's interesting is that the word for church in Akan is what?
Sorry. Which also means to a degree stand up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes. Yeah. And the word for to rise. Sorry?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
100%.
Now,
okay.
What is the word in Akan for a field? Like a grass field.
Okay. Like a foam.
Something else.
I'll tell you
when I say it, you'll be like, wow.
Because obviously the tree gets diluted.
Oh, no, it's okay. Sorry?
What's it called?
Sorry?
Sorry?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Look at that. Yeah, I didn't know that one. My tree is not the best. Yeah.
No, but I mean, no, you know, if it was said in a conversation, because my tree is not 100% either, but if it was said in conversation, you would quickly understand that the person's talking about a field over there. Sorry?
Absolutely.
Sorry, not the daho. Sorry? Yeah, me was sorry.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah.
Okay. You know it already.
Yes, that's right.
Right? So the
I'm
word,
loving the conversation.
yes, if you're having a conversation, you would know that that's what it is. He's talking about a field over there. Oh, so sorry, the whole. You understand what I'm saying? It's
Yes.
he's saying that that's a field that's over there.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We're talking about a piece of
Absolutely.
land. We're talking about a field.
Yeah.
And so even when farmers talk, they would even talk about cultivating that field. They would use the word sari. Right? Now, so the word for field is rooted in asar.
Yes.
The word for church is rooted in asar. The word for rising, to stand up or to rise from your slumber, is rooted in asar. What more do we need to know about where we come from?
Brother, not forgetting there's that woman's book, The Divine Kingship. First European woman to prove this too. A total full connection between the Akan system of the hierarchical system and that of the ancient Egyptians. Eva Merowitz, the book being The Divine Kingship between the Akans of Ghana and the ancient Egyptians. Very old archaic book, but it's worthwhile a reference for anybody. But thank you, absolutely. Okay, I love that.
And you know what's really interesting is that when you say a form, that's more of an uncultivated field.
It is. That's
right.
And that's
right.
That
but
is
sari actually refers more to a cultivated field, like a lawn, a piece of grass that's actually maintained well. A form is something that is actually overgrown.
It's basically like a jungle.
Right.
Yeah.
So more of a cultivated field, sorry. So it tells you about asar in terms of teaching cultivation.
Of course. That is wow.
And we talk in our language, and we don't remember these things because we're not taught these things, but the answers of what our ancestors are saying is actually revealed in the language that exists. And actually, that's how Theophilo Benga and Cheikh Anta Diop in the UNESCO conference in the 1980s proved that the ancient Egyptians were actually Africans, Black Africans. They did it through a linguistic analysis.
Yes, look at
that. Actually, the ancient Egyptian language of Metu Neter is literally a Bantu language.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
That is not a Semitic language, an Afro-Asiatic language. It's actually a Bantu language. And the way you know, for the listeners, the way you know the languages are related is you take common words that are not imports. So, for instance, everyone has trees in their environment. So the word for tree would be similar in Akan as the word for tree in ancient Egypt, right? The word for water, the word for everyone has water, the word for heat, the word. So they did these breakdowns to show that Bantu languages have these words in common that actually descend from ancient Egypt, right? So we have that not only bloodline, but also the intellectual expression of language, because all languages is trying to identify we're trying to identify and delineate and differentiate things in our natural environment, one from the other. So we give those things words. If things weren't different, we wouldn't have different words, right? So it's actually languages used to mark distinctions in our natural environment, right? So those things that are imported will have the imported name. So for instance, do you know what the word for blue jeans is in French? Like blue jeans, like, you know, the jeans that you wear?
No.
Do you know what the word for blue jeans is?
No, please. Bring on the education, man. We're learning here.
It's blue jeans. Because it was imported. Right?
Of course.
What's the word for Coca-Cola in French?
Oh God! Well, that's the same word everywhere. Coca-Cola. Yep. I love it.
Yeah, because it was imported.
Beautiful, simple breakdowns. Yes, indeed.
So anyway, what we're saying is that Pan-Africanism exists through our linguistic expressions, our spiritual expressions, our cultural expressions, our musical expressions, in so many ways. And so you're handling the spiritual expression part. You get into Vodou, you focus on Vodou, you give us an understanding to take away the misinformation, because let's look at it this way. I mean, your t-shirt really says it all. Vodou, Theology of Liberation. who would hate Vodou the most? If Vodou is a theology of liberation, who would hate it the most? Those who are against our liberation.
Absolutely.
So as an African person, to hate Vodou means that you've been taught to hate your liberation.
Well, yeah.
Right? Because my contention is the leaders of Haitian society, the men like Dati Boukman, because Dati Boukman was actually from Jamaica.
That's right. That's right.
He comes there after you have a revolt with Makandal, who is a priest. Right? He's an indigenous and a Catholic priest.
Yes.
And he uses religion to fight against slavery. But what happens with Makandal? Oh, I think your camera's gone.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's back now. Yeah, your camera's back now.
Right.
Fine, you're fine. Makandal is captured. How? Snitching.
Exactly.
Through
the same
someone snitching, basically through Catholic procedures of so-called religious expression that doesn't serve you, that is actually part of a counterintelligence program.
Right. Yeah.
So now you have Dati Boukman come and say, Makandal was a great man. What failed him was the religion of the people he was trying to help, which is the European religion, which has as its feature, it's not a bug, it's the feature. The feature is self-snitching.
Yeah.
So we have to deal with this problem if we're going to be free. How do we get a people who unknowingly are subscribing to something that causes them to give up information against their own interests?
That's right. That's absolutely right.
We have to adopt Vodou. Without it, we can't be free. This is what I need people to understand. That's why your t-shirt says it all. If people actually are paying attention, Vodou, the theology of liberation. It is actually a military apparatus.
100%.
Right? Because let me tell you my story. My story was this. I go to Haiti. I study the Haitian Revolution. I go to Haiti and I go see what's going on in Haiti for myself. I went to Haiti after the earthquake, the major earthquake in 2010. I went there to volunteer. And so as I go, I'm there, and being who I am, of course, I have to go to La Citadelle. La Citadelle and Sanssouci Palace, and I have to go to Bois Caiman to pay my respect. All of that is in the northern part of Haiti in Milo. So I go and I stay in Milo, and I meet a man there in Milo named Maurice Etienne. Maurice Etienne is a guide who gives historical tours. And he also has a place called La Cour La Caille, which gives the history of Haiti. What's very interesting is that in Haiti, there are people there, old centenarians, 100-year-old people whose grandparents fought with Toussaint Louverture. Who were alive. Their grandparents fought with you see, people talk about this thing like it's the history so far removed.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? But this is actually very recent history. This is very recent history. And so when I went to La Citadelle, and when you go to La Citadelle, there are 360 cannons. First of all, you have to ride a horse up there, and it takes a few hours to get up there. And when you reach there, you're in the clouds, literally. It's misty up there, and that's where we built a fort. For those who don't know, that's where we built a fort to be able to see if the Europeans were going to come again. It was built after our independence in Haiti, and it was built by Henri Christophe. Henri Christophe he became the king of northern Haiti, but his history is very interesting too, because he actually wasn't from Haiti, he's from Grenada.
That's right.
He learns to build, because Grenada is very mountainous, he learns to build on mountains. And so Dessalines tells him, we need a fort built, and Henri Christophe is the perfect person to do it, because he's coming from Grenada, and building on mountains and hills and precipices is nothing to these men.
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
They
Absolutely.
build and they have these cannons, and I see all these cannons, and history is real, man. When you see the cannons, you touch the cannons, all of them have the insignia, the crown insignia of the colonizing and the enslaving country. So you will see cannons from Spain, England, and France.
Right. Okay.
And these are cannons that we literally boat jacked. You see, they call carjacking.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
boat jacked. We raided the ships and took the cannons off of the ships, and we used them for our benefit.
That's
And
right.
actually, Pétion, who was one of the generals who became the president of Southern Haiti, who was a mulatto general who fought in the Haitian independence wars, he was actually a master of the cannon. He could hit you with a cannon from a mile away. He was very good. So cannons were very important. And so because I'm more of a materialist, I'm into like science and what works. My understanding at the time was that Vodou wasn't actually, I felt like Vodou was getting too much credit for our winning the war against France, Spain, and all of that, because I felt like it was diminishing our scientific and military efforts and the fact that it was actually cannons. We needed cannons, right? Until I understood a little bit further this whole thing about the Catholic Church and espionage and intelligence gathering, that basically the Catholic Church served as a counterintelligence program through the confessions, the confession apparatus, in that the cannons would have meant nothing if everyone's going to be snitching on you.
Yeah.
So that's when I understood the importance of voodoo. Like I understood the importance of believing in yourself and not having gods of your enemies. But in terms of operational utility, you cannot fight a war if the people, the soldiers on your side, have a tendency every Friday to go snitch to the other side.
Yeah, absolutely.
For their salvation. It won't work.
Absolutely.
This is why these things become so important if they're explained properly to us. And we have to understand that, listen, you can't get what you need to get if you have traditions from those people who are exploiting you that you engage in involuntarily and don't even know about.
Absolutely. And brother, I know you're on a roll, but I'm just going to interject there.
No, I was actually going to ask you at this point to interject.
Okay, no,
Yes.
because the points you're putting forward, as I said, I'm loving it because is expanding my understanding. I said the confession, the way you broke it down, and I sat down and I understood. Because one of the things I always wondered was, how come this priest has never gone to tell the headmistress of the school that this church is associated with, that student of yours is the one causing all the problems that you can't seem to find the perpetrator for? So, you put it in that context. Then the next thing that I love is we have to remember that Bookman Dati, the reason he has that name is because once upon a time, before he became a high Hungan, he was a Muslim. And that Bookman refers to the fact that he had a Quran.
Yes.
So he was a man of the book.
Yes.
But then he couldn't come into his full expression until he primed his mind with this ancestral knowledge. I also love the fact that you went with the as you say you call you might consider yourself a materialist, but then because you were going to seek and think, maybe this thing we know as voodoo that we misperceive to be just a religious expression, but actually has practical applications, because even as you said that, then I also remembered, because they make a lot of emphasis on the fact that they had to have an oath that bonded them. Because there's no wonder among those generals at Boakaiman, none of them ever went and snitched now, did they? So again, we understand that from that practical utility, yes, of understanding that something has bonded us so well together.
Yes.
And we look again, we can look at aspects of the revolution, for instance, where the generals then had to make decisions of when to fight, because the last cavalry that was brought, over 60,000 strong, and they decided, let them come, because we know their immunity level. We will engage them at a time when the tropical diseases have taken over.
Yellow
so
fever.
They now use, thank you. They now use their knowledge of nature, which again is an expression out of Vodou. to do what? Fight their wars. So it's not the expression of religiosity that we would
Right.
like to only assume it is. It has a practical function, but only if you know how you're meant
Yes,
to use that modality.
exactly. And we can even get further into that. I mean, this is a very exciting conversation, right? Because
Yep.
we can get further into it because the Haitians, they greet each other. You know, they're greeting sac passe.
Yes.
All right. Do you know what the response to sac passe is?
No, because
Oh,
it's
you're gonna
actually
love
the
this.
wife.
You're gonna
Okay,
love
go
this.
ahead. Yeah.
The
It's the
response,
wife who went to film, not me.
okay, you will love this. The response to sac passe is not boule. Do you know what not boule means? It means,
No.
okay, so sac passe is what's happening, what's going on, basically.
Yes.
That's the way, you know, you greet someone. So I would see, I say sac passe. The
Yes.
response till this day is not boule. Not boule means literally, we're burning.
Wow. Okay. The
So,
field.
yes, we're burning the fields in the slave master's house.
That's right.
So in the Haitian, this is what I'm saying, that language is so important. It reveals the truth.
It does always.
Within the Haitian consciousness till this day, the response is a revolutionary response to a greeting, because it had to be a whole island war.
Yes, absolutely.
So the way they greeted each other, just like Hannibal, in the time of Hannibal, when Rome took over, they say, "Good morning, Carthaginian citizen.
Must fall.
Rome must fall."
Yeah.
That's how they greeted each other. And the Haitians, the same way. How are you? Sac passe, what's happening? What do you mean what's happening? We are burning. That's what we're doing. That's what it is. Even if you're not, that's what we're doing. We're burning.
It's a national consciousness now.
It's a national
Your prime
consciousness now.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So now Vodou gets into the situation because let's go back to Boukman Duty. As you rightly said, he's Muslim. He's Muslim. He gets transported to Haiti because he actually was causing trouble in Jamaica. Haiti was the place where they sent all the troublemakers.
Yeah, that's right.
Because it was so harsh. Anyone who wants to know how harsh the treatment of Africans was in Haiti, just read the first chapter of Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James. That chapter is called The Property. Everyone should read that. Now, Boukman Duty becomes a leader of the Haitian Revolution who is Muslim. Why is it that he's looking at a people who have been tortured and forced to be Catholics? He is Muslim. He has a choice to make. Why didn't he try to make his followers Muslim?
Exactly.
Because this is a conversation he would have had to have in his mind.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Now, the backdrop for the listeners, what you need to understand is you need to read the letters that Napoleon Bonaparte wrote to his generals Leclerc and Rochambeau. Rochambeau came because Leclerc actually ended up failing, and Rochambeau was the most brutal general that they had. So he sent them there, and his mission was two things: to capture General Jean-Jacques Dessalines and to exterminate all the Africans on the island of Saint-Domingue. This is the stakes we were dealing with. This is the stakes we were dealing with. If this revolution failed, every single Haitian, every single African on the island would have been exterminated. And then they would have shipped in a fresh batch of Africans because they believed that the Haitian mind was contaminated towards revolution.
Right.
We were on that island and we were incorrigible. So we had to be killed off. So the stakes are high. So if the stakes are high, you have to make decisions very quickly. Boukman Duty did not choose Islam. He understood that these people are people who are been taught over the years of brutality to worship Catholic saints. So what is more expeditious? To teach them a whole new system with Allah and a whole new book, or to use what they already have and just put a twist to it. And that's what they did. And that's how important what of a historical artifact and a historical instructional manual that voodoo is.
Yeah.
That in the time where you don't have much time for error or much opportunity to make mistakes, you have to do things very quickly and you have to speak to people on their terms, right? People are using this saint, the saint of this, the saint of that, that saint. It's going to take too long and too many generations to have them say, Bismillah wa Muhammad wa Rasulallah.
Yeah. 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 And I doubt there'll be the same level of connection either.
Exactly. It's too much time to take to have people do their shahada and have the 5 pillars of Islam and do five prayers a day and to say that they're going to go to Mecca at some time for their Hajj and all of that. That's too different. You have to speak to people. This is an emergency that's happening, you know. Your house is on fire.
Yeah.
You don't have time to teach people a whole new concept. You will teach people who are already having an African foundation to mix it with what they already are involved in, which is Catholicism. And that's what we have in terms of voodoo. So for the people who don't know voodoo, what it is on its face, let's have a conversation about that. What voodoo is, the use of the saints, the lois, all of that. I just want you to interject now and just give people a little education on voodoo and what the figures of voodoo are. You know, you talked about Hungans, which is the chief priest and all that. So people know what voodoo is, because how can we talk about it without giving people a sense of what it really is from a non-pejorative point of view? Because up until now, most people have been scared of voodoo, don't want to embrace voodoo, and have been taught that it's evil, it's this and that. So let's talk about voodoo.
Absolutely. Yes, brother. Give thanks for that. And also do note the question down, because I've been itching to ask you this question, that what for you, as someone who says you were a materialist, what drew you to these spiritual places within Haiti that have a spiritual significance, like Boakaiman, and also the Citadel? Because for me, I'd also like to know that aspect of your story.
Yes, absolutely. We'll get to that.
When we talk about what is Vodou, what we're talking about, like all African spiritual expressions, is a system of knowing yourself and your environment and how you're directly connected to that environment via the very basic understanding that even when you die as a person and we put you in the ground, in some years you become the ground. There is no difference between you and the ground. So what Vodou is, as an African expression, is it looks to see what you as the human being are and your role within the very cosmos itself. How are you expressed as an elemental being? Because in Voodoo on the continent, whether it's in Benin or is among the Ewes and the Fon people of Benin, Ghana, as well as along the West African coast, Voodoo is also a human being. We refer to a human being as a Vodou as much as we refer to the Loa or the elemental forces like lightning, like the rain, okay, like the oceans, that we're just extensions of these elements. So the human being is also a Vodou. So what Vodou is on the surface can look like what we will call a religion, because you have a group of people who get together to venerate a particular force or a particular energy. But what Africans understand within all expressions of the systems, including Vodou, is that as we're engaged in these practices, we get mental connections with elements, with energies that can inform us and guide us. So at the very, if you want to call it, to break it down as a system, so where we have in, let's say, a religion, you have what we call God, or this concept of where we all come from. In Haitian Vodou, they have the energies of Dambala and Aidawedo. There's a masculine and a feminine force which together bring forth creation. And I'll segue back to what Brother Heru was saying earlier about those scholars who've now gone back to really look at these, so we understand that in a sense you're not listening to should we say, biblical stories of creation, which involve some mythological understandings. When you think about it, to create anything, what do you need? In terms of even just human beings, you need a man and a woman. A man cannot create of himself and make men and women when there is no female archetype to make that of. But in Vodou, even in Haiti, they have Dambala and Aida Wedo together. Or they have Bon Dieu, and they also have Bon Dieu Mamamoué, which is the female expression of Bon Dieu, which is seen as a masculine. Okay, even when you go onto the continent, to the origins of Vodou in Benin, there as well, the creator concept is Mau Lisa, which again, it's a combination of a masculine and a feminine force. So what we're dealing with is a biological process. A man and a woman coming together to create life, because that's what Vodou at its core deals with, the creation and continuation of life. And you as a human being are also a Vodou because you are an extension from that source. You're no different. So you have the creator concept at the top, should we say, or at the origins of the hierarchy. Then we have what we call Loa, or on the continent they will call Voodoo, which means the elemental forces. So this is where you have energies like Ogun, elements like Oya. Yes. In Haitian Vodou, they call these elements, they don't call them Orisha as we find in Nigeria. They call them Loa, the forces of nature, because that's in the Creole syncretic language that has been created by Haitians. And the other thing too worth mentioning at this point is that Haitian Vodou comes from a combination or a syncretism of three particular African ethnic groups. The Yoruba, yeah, because it's from there that especially we get, for instance, an energy such as Ogun, because Ogun is not just confined to Yoruba Ifa. You find Ogun actually across West Africa. Even among the Gans in Ghana, they know Ogu. They know Ogu, they know Sango. They don't call him Shango, they call him Sango. Yeah, they have that intonation of themselves. Again,
amongst the Ga people.
The Ga. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, I
If you go
didn't
to
know that.
Labadi now, you find shrines to Sango along
Oh,
Labadi on the coast.
I didn't know that.
Yep, indeed. This one I found on the first documentary, Ancestral Voices, Esoteric African Knowledge, because we interview a lot of Ga priestesses in Labadi.
Yeah. But you
Yeah,
know what's
and
interesting? Don't they say that
go on.
the Ghan people come from Nigeria?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's very interesting. That makes a lot of sense too.
It does indeed. But
Yeah.
you know, Brother Heru, we are the same people moving
Of
in
course,
different
of course,
directions,
of
finding
course. These are
ourselves as
all
we
phony
go along.
boundaries. They're all phony boundaries.
Exactly. Yeah. So, you know, we have the Yoruba from which we get the concept of Loa, because we find them, the elemental forces being connected there. We also have the Congo. The Bakongo cosmology is heavy in Haitian Vodou, because this is where we get the concept of the space of the circle, what we find in the Dikenga cosmogram in the Bakongo system, yes, which deals with what we call the circle of life. And you also find in the ritual space. Yeah. Then we also have the Ewe tradition, which is where we get the very word voodoo, you know, the Ewe and the Fon of Benin. And then again, we find the interplay with the elemental forces. So we have the creator as the origin source, we have the elemental forces in between, and then we have the human being, which is also a voodoo, because the voodoo comes from that extension. That is what voodoo is in principle. But then when you look at voodoo in practice too, it's like a tool for living. So we have the essence or the knowing that there are particular aspects of nature that we can use to our benefit, to how we live. And one example is what we already discussed, that in there, we didn't have qualified so-called doctors, but the military strategists knew when it would be best to engage in battle, because we already had knowledge of something that we now call the immune system. And we knew that, for instance, the French and all the invading forces would have a high susceptibility to certain diseases at certain time of the year. Do you understand? So we
Absolutely.
can we
Absolutely.
can even go back to Makandal and look at his extensive poisoning campaign over the
Yeah.
years. Yeah, he had to have what we would call a high degree of horticultural or botanical knowledge.
Yeah.
What we already also mentioned about Carter G. Woodson, and which helped him create all these inventions about the peanuts.
Mm-hmm.
This knowledge sometimes is not taught, Brother Heru, because we know that this knowledge, it also flows down through your genes. Yes.
Yeah.
And some of us who are more, I guess, attuned to this knowledge, it becomes conscious in their the awakening consciousness. So they start
Yeah.
to know things.
It's
Yeah,
true.
they
That
don't
is
have to be
true.
taught in the
That is
school.
that is certainly I've certainly witnessed it, and I wish I witnessed it recently when I was in Ghana. And I'll just say it for the
Okay.
listeners, you know, just to personalize this. As many people know that I'm the founder of Herbal Results, a company where I make herbal medicines, and I did it through experimentation. And I was you know, I did it through experimentation where I'm self-taught in plant extraction, right? And you know, I was in Ghana recently and I was talking to my uncle, and my uncle was talking about my grandfather, his father. And he was saying, you know, you're a lot like my father, your grandfather, you don't even know it. I said, yeah. He said, yeah, you know, let me take you somewhere. Let me drive you by this. You see this house here? My father, your grandfather, was a pharmacist. And he was one of the leading pharmacists in Ghana. He had his own shop, and he spent a lot of his time mixing and experimenting with concoctions.
Right.
Just like what you do. And I was like, wow. Out of all the things that I could be doing with my life, I'm doing the same thing that my grandfather did without even knowing it.
Right.
Right. So a lot of like what you're saying, a lot of it is epigenetics. We have things in us that, I mean, you know, you find out that your great grandfather was a singer and then now you're a singer. Absolutely. Right. And I guess Africans formalized it because in most of African society, most trades were passed down through blood.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Yes. And guilds. Yep.
Yes. And guilds. So, I mean, it's very interesting. I was just interjecting just for the listeners to know that, no, he's not just, what he's saying is not, he's not talking. This is all true. This is stuff that can be seen.
Absolutely, brother. And I think many of the listeners have also, you know, had similar experiences. And for some, it's very easy for us to just dismiss it as something that's coincidental. You know, as you said, you had to get to Ghana to find out that you share a certain interest. Now, I'm taking it this grandfather you'd never met. So, you know, it's even interesting that you said that maybe it was formalized through family line. But let's think of your situation now. How come you who'd never met that grandfather, as you said, somehow ended up doing the same practices that he did? Where did that knowledge and even that belief that you could do that come from?
Right. Or even that interest.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Same with myself. I find myself coming into education. And one of the things I always said growing up with two parents who were educationists was that I would never, ever consider teaching as a profession. I did it for a good 15 years. Yeah. So again, there's that familiarity, but then there's also that essence. My grandmother was also a market woman. Yes. And brother Heru, for the last close to 10, 15 years now, my life has been an entrepreneurial one. Because again, I still make those rituals that bring my memory. One of the core themes in Haitian Vodou, what it's about, Brother Heru, is it's about remembering. It's about remembering and bringing those traits within us forward. That is one of the other core bits. Because once you bring those traits forward, another concept that we find in Haitian Vodou is the fact that you're not just born, in a sense, to just live. You're born because you have what we call a divine purpose. And again, this is another concept you find across all the African traditions. There's a reason why you're here. And that reason, if you work with it positively, you become of beneficence to others. This is where you become an ancestor. So,
Mhm.
you know, you mentioned the story about Osar.
Mhm.
Had Osar not taught the people to cultivate, he wouldn't be revered to this day as an ancestor. And in his case, he even becomes deified.
Right.
Yes, because he gives the people tools for living where
Right.
they can feed themselves.
Right.
The same thing with Jean-Jacques Dessalines. So now let's look at Africans, Haitians, however many hundreds of years later. Dessalines, on achieving independence and his brutal assassination, he's now added to the pantheon of Loa. He's a deified ancestor because he gave them or led them to a victory that even Toussaint sadly didn't manage to take that far. So then this is how we honor the best of ourselves, because in doing so, we also activate a certain part of our memories that allows us to do certain things. Now, obviously, where people will come with this is, okay, but you know, we can't prove this in a laboratory. We can't follow the formula as A, B, C, and you know, turn into a commodity and repeat it ever so often. But then again, what we're dealing with is as intangible as the very air that we breathe. Do you understand? Because it
Mhm.
runs through us. It's just like the best way I can call it, like an electric current
Mhm.
that runs through us. And by certain practices, we prime ourselves to attach them. And this is where it leads me back to my question. So I segue it back to you, which
Yeah.
is the fact that as you kind of assumed you were just a materialist, what
Yeah.
is it that led you into these specific places? Because there must have been something that is spurring your interest. What is this energy, this force
Yeah.
that then takes you along those paths to go and explore yourself in these places?
Okay. So that's a very good question, and I'll answer it like this. So I'm one of these people who try not to be arrogant in my beliefs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One of the best quotes that I adhere to is that the way of the advanced man is to assume that there is something to learn from everyone you speak to,
Beautiful.
right?
Beautiful. Yes,
So
absolutely.
even people who you disagree with or things you don't believe in, it's good to have conversations because there's something that you could learn. And if you don't feel there's something you could learn, then you stop learning,
Right.
right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I approach things that way. So even if I am someone who, let's just say, would have been an atheist,
Mm-hmm.
I'm still going to have conversations with religious people because there may be something for me to learn there, right? And I just think that that's a good approach to life.
No,
Um,
beautiful.
Now, I am someone who very early in my development as a child rejected religion, very
Grew up in
early.
a
And
Ghanaian
I
household.
remember, and the reason why, that's why I asked you what I asked you, because I was confronted with this question when, well, it started with going to church as a young boy, maybe 7, 8, 9. And every time I went into church, I would get a headache, a pounding headache every
Wow.
time. And my body was just responding to something that I was allergic to church.
Okay.
And I never figured out why. Then I would get into intellectual pursuit of the Bible, what it's about. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't agree with what I was reading. You know, I saw it very clearly, particularly the Old Testament. I saw it very clearly as a land grab. And I would do exercises where I would change Moses' name to somebody else. And if anyone else would have done what Moses did, he would have been seen as a Hitler. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's passages in the Bible where Moses tells his general to kill the Midianites, you know. And remember, the Israelites, they say they came out of Egypt, so literally they were invaders on another land when they crossed the Red Sea, allegedly, right? So I was
Yes.
aware of that. And but what happened to the Midianites is what threw me off, is that he says in the Old Testament, you know, kill the Midianites. And when the general comes back and Moses asks him, did you do what I said? And the general says, I didn't have the heart to kill the women and the children. And Moses says, go back, kill the women and the children, and save the virgins for yourselves. So
Okay.
it's very clear to me that if anyone else would have done that, Adolf Hitler or whatever, they would be seen as a bad person. And I was always, as a child, so I think my sensitivity came from coming to America and going to school and being laughed at for not speaking English, because I spoke very fluent Twi.
Wow.
When I got to America, I was speaking Twi very early as a child, and adults were very impressed with me because of my language skills. As a 3-year-old, I could have conversations with adults in Twi, perfect Twi, complex Twi, and all of that. And I remember learning English when I came to America, and the other children in the kindergarten were laughing at me. And then also having a last name, Ofori-Atta, that stands out, where everyone's last name is Johnson, Jackson, Williams, what have you. Children would laugh at me whenever they would do attendance. So I developed a certain consciousness to always defend the underdog, because I was the underdog, where other Black children would laugh at me because they had been miseducated about Africa and thought Africa was just about monkeys and trees. I was called African booty snatcher and African this and whatever, in very pejorative terms. So I always sided with the Midianites. And so when I read it, I'm looking at Moses, and the narrative is, getting you to side with Moses, but I sided with the Midianites. I said, why should they be exterminated?
Right.
So that made me question the sanctity and the holiness of someone named Moses. And then as I grew older, I looked at the Jesus story, and frankly, I wasn't impressed.
Yep. Okay.
Right? Yep. I'm just keeping it real. Outside of the mysticism, out of all the people I'd read about, I wasn't really impressed with him per se. And I just didn't believe it. And I remember my father, one day I'm in the car with him, and he asked me, my father's a very interesting man because he was a historian. My father was a very well-known surgeon. He was actually one of the first Western trained, he was actually the first group of Western trained doctors to graduate from Kolebu, the University of Ghana Medical School, and to work in the hospital system there. And he was actually funded by Kwame Nkrumah. Okay. So my father was an intellectual and very inquisitive. One of his favorite topics was history. And one day we started talking about religion, and I said something, and he said, you don't believe in this, in Christianity? Are you a Christian? I remember being in high school, and I had the courage to be honest with him and say, no, I don't. Yeah. He left it alone.
Oh, wow.
He asked me why. I explained it. He didn't debate with me. He just left it alone. And I wonder what was going on in his head at the time, but I left it alone. And then I had a very seminal conversation with my mother, where my mother was upset at me for publicly, like within the family, saying I didn't believe in Christianity. And then I asked my mother some questions. I said, so do you really believe that Jesus could be born from a spirit? Like, you don't believe that her husband impregnated her? You think that like a spirit came and impregnated her? The mother, and he was born, and you really believe that? And my mother was like, what do you mean? Who believes that? So my mother didn't even know the story of Immaculate Conception. She wasn't even aware that this is what the belief system was. She didn't believe it, but when I said, this is what the Bible says, she just got quiet.
Okay.
So here she was, a young girl raised to just accept it without analyzing it.
This is it. This is it. No analysis by our people.
No analysis. Yep. So it was very telling to me. So as an outsider now, in many ways, I've always been an outsider, right? I never was fully American. Never. And then when I learned about American history, I didn't want to be. And I was never fully Ghanaian because I didn't grow up in Ghana.
Right.
I was always an outsider. I was always the outsider.
Right.
So being an outsider develops a certain identity and a way of thinking. And I started listening to atheists, and I agree with them. There's no way to know any of these things that people are saying. And most of religion, as John Henry Clarke said, is that religion is a cultural expression. And so which culture do you want to actually be part of? And my culture was the culture of Pan-African liberation. So I didn't see the role that any religion or anything plays into it. When a bomb is dropping on your head, you don't go to any deity to get you out of it. You go to science and technology to learn how you can stop the bombs from dropping and developing yourselves through engineering and all of that. And so I always felt that we spent too much time on spirituality as a people, and that it was keeping us away from science and technology in terms of solving our problems. We see the classic image of poor people relying on their deities, and they believe in it more than wealthy people who don't rely on those things.
No disagreement whatsoever
Right?
with you there, brother. Yes, absolutely.
So I started studying the Haitian Rev. So my orientation is that spirituality, religion is actually bad for Black people and African people. That is my assessment. That is my determination. And I also understand how religion and all spirituality and all of it starts. And I understand that it starts with superstition, right? And most religion is rooted in superstition, the superstition of Jesus, the superstition of, whereas you have people, and also I would also see people in the Black conscious community go from being Christians to being, you know, African spiritualists, but still suffering from superstitious beliefs and modalities where their lives are not changing. They feel like they can pray to Yemaya, you know, as the deity of water, when it, you know, you had better learn how to swim before you go into this lake, right? Yemaya is not going to save you. So
100%, yes.
So that's how I became a materialist, right? That it's better for us to master the science that's in front of us. And I felt like religion and spirituality was actually a luxurious philosophical position to take, that we didn't have the time for the luxury of these things, that we had better study what we know can save us, which is science, engineering, technology. So I went to Haiti to literally go to the places of the Haitian Revolution devoid of voodoo, devoid of feeling that voodoo was important. And actually, I would get very angry at people who thought that voodoo was important to Haitian liberation, that I felt that it was undermining the genius of the generals who were using military tactics, scientific engineering, weaponry, the form of missiles at the time, which is cannons. And this is what got us out of the trouble. Until I understood that, number one, so just to backtrack, I always ask myself, where did religion come from? How did religion start? What is the point of it? Why do people always gravitate towards it? What use is it? And it let me know that religion starts through societies, villages, cultures, communities, and the first communities form always by bodies of water. Right?
Yes.
That's where you get Egypt and Nile Valley civilization. You wouldn't have had it without the Nile. You need water sources to develop. And so when you are setting up your society next to water sources, the elders are charged with one thing and one thing only, which is the continuation of the people, the continuity of the people, right, into the next generation. That's what elders are charged with. And so you can then imagine that the elders would have, because I have a very imaginative mind, and the way I remember things is I visualize it. So I can imagine the conversations the elders had to have once they decide to settle on the banks of the Nile. The most important thing at the time is to make sure that the people do not pollute the waters.
Right, absolutely, yes.
How do you admonish people to not pollute the waters? There's only going to be two ways. You will have to scare them through superstition to say that there are spirits in the waters, and if you pollute the waters, those spirits will cause problems in your life. That is a quick way to control behavior, because religion, at the end of the day, whether it's Vodou, Christianity, anything, is actually there to control desired behavior of a people. That's full stop,
absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
So
yes,
with it, you need superstition to a degree to scare people to actually behave in a manner that is necessary for their survival.
100%.
So you can imagine that the council of the elders are having a debate and saying, we're going to have to tell these people there's a spirit in the water, and if you pollute this water, that spirit is going to curse you. And then I can imagine that there's a group of people in that group of elders that say, no, we can't do that. We're going to have to teach people about microbiology. We're going to have to teach them that, if you defecate in the waters, it's going to cause dysentery, it's going to cause cholera, it's going to cause, because of microbes that come that are actually going to infect your gut, and it's going to cause you to die.
That's right.
Then the ones who say we need superstition because we need people to not pollute the water tonight. It's going to take us too long to teach people microbiology so then you come up with these stories.
That's right. 100%. Yep, absolutely.
And the compromise is giving people stories of deities that have to reflect the natural world. That's the compromise. But the problem is when people start taking the deities literally and don't take them as metaphorical lessons.
That's right. Yes.
You see, when you take them literally, it becomes now superstition.
Oh yeah. Well,
if you take it as
well.
Yes. You take it as metaphorical lessons, now it becomes a teaching tool.
There you go. There you go.
Right?
Yeah,
so I understood the value of an expedited teaching tool. Because I put myself in the Haitian Revolution, and you have people who have been forced into Christianity, beat, tortured, killed into believing that Jesus is their savior, who happens to look like a European, and also a system of counterintelligence. And if you want to win this war, what do you have to do? You have to recalibrate the minds of the people. And it was at that point that I saw the value of something like Vodou, because I put myself in a practical situation. Practical situation is you cannot win a war against the French if you have people who are your rank and file who go every Friday to talk to a priest who is part of the colonial slave administration.
That's right.
Right? So I saw that, and I saw the power of that. So I didn't go to Bois Caiman as a religious experience, because I went to Bois Caiman because that was the location where the declaration of war was made. Remember, I'm a materialist at the time. I'm 100%. So the Vodou aspect of Bois Caiman is not important to me. I'm going there because that's where people decided to fight.
Yes.
And took an oath. But then in my maturation, in understanding things a little bit better, I understood, and in reading Laird Scranton's books, I'm understanding that these hieroglyphic characters are more than just hieroglyphic characters, that Osar is more. These are stories that are being told because the human being learns best through storytelling.
Absolutely.
That's why movies and all of these things are so important and so dangerous at the same time.
Oh, absolutely, based on how you decide to use them.
Exactly. So that's how I got to where I got, that I see that religion, spirituality, if not taken literally and taken metaphorically, is actually an expeditious learning tool towards desired behavior.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for explaining it so clearly. And I'm sure your listeners will learn as much from it as for me. As I'm also learning. And for me, what I'll also add to that, my good brother, is the same. For me, as I said, it's not a religious thing, because when you really look at how it's been used in all these, because they're knowledge systems, they're teaching tools. But then we also see the interference of human greed, whereby, in these. Sorry, I had a call that
the mute came on.
Yes. So in these societies, you start to find or create what they call priest classes. And what these priest classes eventually become are places where they abuse their power. Because rather than teach people these systems as useful tools, because when you look at it, really, it's a teaching tool again to prime your mind. This is one of the most effective psychological tools. And why I identify with these African systems, and as much as I've seen and experienced them on a certain energetic level, it's what it does to prime my mind. Because if I know that I'm a Vodou, meaning I'm the same expression as I see in nature, then what tells me that there is nothing that I can't do if I apply myself?
Right.
So my conception of the system is what it allows me to know about myself and what I'm able to do in terms of my potential as a human being, rather than if I'm going to, let's say, go and prostrate myself by a riverbank and not understand that my veneration for the riverbank is the fact that it gives me food. So let's say, as an instance, as you correctly said, I won't go and be defecating into that water because that's also where I'm going to get my food from. So why would I need to do that? Rather, I need to understand my defecation as perhaps good fertilizer for the crops I will grow. And in that body of water, I need to give myself breaks from fishing out of that water, because if I don't, what I'm going to end up with is a body of water that has no food in it. I will overfish it to the degree that I will starve myself. So what Vodou and all these other systems do is it gives us tools for learning how to create reciprocal ecosystems that allow us to continue the life process. So I love the fact that you took us to the Nile Valley and explained the importance of water, because this really is how we should all be understanding these African system of knowledge, including Vodou, that what functional uses does it bring to our lives? And for me, I love nothing more so than the psychological priming of what it gives your mind. Because as you engage in these processes, you literally awaken these memories. And this is what I was telling you about being my experiences with my grandmother right from the beginning, because they don't come from an experience of religiosity. They come from an experience of what I was able to then perceive psychologically, and how I ended up using that knowledge. So for me, it's not religious. It's actually a guiding tool, a teaching tool. It shows me what to do, which skill set I need to master. As I told you, I ended up becoming a teacher, and I never ever wanted to become a teacher. Following that, I ended up being an entrepreneur, which is one of my grandmother's traits, because she worked in the market. You see, so as we engage in these practices, all we're doing is continuing that circle of life. So I love it for its practicality. It's not, I would never think be a spirit in the water. Really, that's for the masses. Those who sadly, this priestly class then ends up manipulating for
Yeah.
their own benefit, because that's essentially what it is.
Yeah.
They don't want to give people the tools to become self-sustaining, sustaining individuals that don't need them. They rather create states of dependency.
Right. And they're no different. They're no different than the medical system.
Oh,
Right?
absolutely.
They're no different.
Absolutely.
So I don't want people to think that this is endemic or specific to people in the spiritual or religious world. Medicine is a religion as well, right? 100%. They want the doctors or the priests.
Yes.
You know, they don't want, many of them don't want you to heal yourself without them.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Or, you know, be taught how you can actually avoid going to them by learning health yourself. So we see this, and I mean, it's actually quite profound, and it has huge implications for Africa, where the wealthiest men in Africa are not necessarily businessmen or engineers or even doctors or lawyers. A lot of times tend to be pastors, right? Exactly. Because they're doing this at a very accelerated pace because of the gullibility of the people who are looking for some sort of hope within the poverty that they're living in, right? So my question to you becomes, when you land at the airport in Ghana, what is it like for you, and how do you navigate these conversations to a highly religious people, family members who are highly religious and into their white Jesus? Do you have these conversations? Do you just avoid the conversations? What is life like for you, knowing what you know, and how diplomatic are you? Right. And how diplomatic are you not?
Oh, right. Absolutely. You see, even the way you've asked that question, Brother Heru, I know you're almost asking that question based on your own
Of course.
experiences too. You know, one
Of
minute you're
course.
asking how diplomatic are you versus
Yes.
how diplomatic are you not.
Yes.
You know, how people have always known me in Ghana is that I'm a very self-reliant person. Yep. As I said, for me, the thirst of knowledge has always been a defining feature of myself. And it comes from that, I believe, the ability of my mom to sit down with me and get me to engage in this exercise of communicating, expressing myself through many things. So there's some places, absolutely not. There's no need to have this conversation, Brother Heru, because for some people, the stories are so literal. You know, I'm in groups where in some cases, they kick me out from people that I grew up with because in their minds, I'm just some kind of, again, devil worshiper. But I can also see where they have this mental conflict because in their mind, somebody who's a devil worshiper shouldn't be as blessed as I am, to the
Right.
degree where I've never had to hold down a 9 to 5 job for anything more than 2, 3 years in my life. And it always ends up in the space whereby somebody then feels they need to impose themselves on me. And we've had to end up in an employment tribunal for me to win that case because it expresses itself in even, I believe, how I carry myself. So, you know, sometimes I'll meet people in Ghana and after a while they'll be like, I don't think you're a religious person, are you, my brother? Because there's something about the way you just carry yourself, you know, and they just they catch a vibe because I'm working with an energy. I'm walking with an energy, brother, an energy that has made me understand that as an elemental force, my potential is limitless. So it's in how I speak, it's in how I can be assertive. Yes. So I have learned over time because initially, oh yeah, for a good close to 20 years, I didn't even know any of most of the people I grew up with because we lost that connection. You know, brother, I wanted to learn about the world. Do you understand? I wanted to know what makes this world tick. So I went to places to identify and see where the African story has. Sadly, a large degree of some of those that I grew up with, went to school with, maybe have never even left Ghana. So all they know is that they're waiting for Jesus to come and save them. And then they then hear, oh, you know this brother we grew up with, Dalian, this guy is now on YouTube. He's delivering this lecture about what we consider to be juju. You know, what's wrong with this guy? Has he been possessed? But the next minute you're hearing, okay, so this brother has his work in some of the institutions that we've been colonized to hold dear, in places such as Harvard, in places such as Oxford. So what kind of devil worshiper is getting what they will consider blessings?
Right.
Because I am overcoming different levels of educational barriers that they won't give many a scholar. But that's because I've trained or I've been trained in the system to the degree where I understand how rigorous I know or need my research to be. So for you to be able to debunk my research, mate, you're gonna have to do a lot of work, man. I've learned your system enough to the degree that I can overcome it. Yes, and I've managed to put these systems in these places of scholarship as great scholars before myself have done, such as the Sheikh Anta Diop's and the Theophilo Bengas, because they understood the nature of our system of oppression and how to put ourselves back in that story. So most of my friends end up there's some who love what I do, and there's some who just even hate the mention of my name. But over time, I've learned to understand that it's not everyone who's ready for this conversation. And
Right.
most importantly, because for most of them, the expression of it that they see in Ghana is of people going around trying to get little talisman or amulet that apparently makes them money, or you know, some people who in the worst case scenarios end up killing people thinking that they can use them to make money. Yes, because there's a lot of that illogical practice of these systems as well. Let's not make no mistake about it. Yeah, and so just in the same way you have certain Christian clergy who give people literal understanding so that they are powerless and keep relying on them, there are also some Africans who misuse some of these gifts that they have in pretty much the same way. So I've learned when to have these conversations and when it's not necessary. And to give you the perfect most honest answer, rather, Brother Heru, for me, what concerns me most is how we can now utilize this as a functional approach to problem solving. Yep. As a functional approach to many of the issues that we have. As a functional approach, for instance, as in that it's helped me become a graduate of, still to today, what is regarded as the world's best education institution for educational and social science research. I managed to get into this institution because, again, I had a dream where my grandmother showed me certain things about certain people. I ended up in the interview and I started seeing those people I saw in the dream, and I managed to conduct myself in that interview to gain acceptance. I was the only Black man on that course. And since then, what did I do with that knowledge? I then
Which
ended up,
institution was this?
it's now called the University, it's part of the University College of London. It's called the Institute of Education.
Okay.
For the last 10, 15 years, rated as the world's #1 institution for teacher training and social research. What did I do with those skills from that university? I then used it to compose a framework for African spirituality by using some of the works that have also already existed by the likes of the scholars that have already done. So for me, what that knowledge becomes is it helps us to keep our story going. I'm not going to force anybody come and say you're going to worship Yamaja or Oshun. No, it's about what will that do for you? What did that do for me? It made me confident when I sat in that interview, because I knew when I saw this flashy guy who was answering all the questions, in my dream, it told me, just wait, let the flashy person jump forward and learn how they jump over the barrier. So the man will answer the question. I let him answer first. I pick up bits of his answer, add it to mine. That brother was a Pakistani brother. They didn't let him into the school. When I came back, I was there by myself. So it's about making it as practical as possible, Brother Heru, for our people. And again, this is a call that people have to answer individually. Do you understand? So for me, what would be ideal is being able to have places where we can break down these understandings in the most practical and functional way for Africans to understand that your potential, it's all about your potential, what you do with it in a practical sense, not what you do with it as you're kneeling on your knees, asking for some blessings to materialize out of thin air.
So
Nothing works like
let me go a little further and ask you about the practical application of these spiritual systems, whether it be Vodou or whatever you want to answer this question with. So for instance, because there will be listeners that say, okay, so what's the practical application of this in the real world to make us better? So one of the examples that I think people can see that I gave was the whole taking confessions away from the Catholic priest, the whole self-snitching thing, and how Vodou actually stops that from happening, right? Because now we're insular within ourselves, and we don't have to go outside to an agent of our oppressor to confess any quote unquote sins, right? Now, then the person would say, well, I can see how that would have been useful. So what role does Vodou play right now practically for African self-determination, African independence, African liberation, or what have you, or even personal sovereignty, where a person is like actually functioning without having, a boot on their neck and being told to do this, to do that, and they don't have any sense of personal freedom in their life. So let's just get some working examples of what you mean.
Okay, absolutely. First one being your sense of self-esteem in terms of what you have to offer the world. We're not just enslaved people who are forever at the boot of the Europeans. Yes, we need to look at what our ancestors before have managed to achieve and understand that that knowledge still exists within us. And it's about looking within that lineage to find basically things that we're good at, that perhaps we never even thought or even were aware that we could be good at. So just because you've gone to university and you learn to I don't know, study medicine means that you can only be a doctor. Or you could be a great engineer too. You can build things. And so, in this, you have to look through your lineage. Perhaps you might be able to identify uncles and aunties who had some of that trait, and maybe you've always had a bit of an interest in that, but you're sticking to being a doctor because that's what's paying the bills. So on the sly, you need to cultivate that interest, because you have that interest because it's an aspect of your talent, skill set that comes from your ancestors. So maybe you might take, I don't know, an online course on how to build things. Soon, you might just be building from miniature sculptures. The next minute, you know, you'll be building a house. Next minute, you know, you might build a whole town, because you're calling forth that epigenetic knowledge. That is one of the key things. We have to understand that we're not the worthless slaves that history has forced us to, for most of us, to accept of ourselves.
Right.
That's one of the first core, that our potential.
Yeah, so I think that, just to take what you're saying a little further, I think the power of what you're saying is that if you believe that your deity looks like a European from London or France, then your highest expression of worship to that deity will be in service to that deity. And if that deity is not related to your ancestral line, you will not be serving yourself.
Absolutely, 100%.
Right?
Yep. No, you're fully right. And just to add a bit onto that, that in the African understanding, the only deity you should be worshiping, if anything, is yourself, because you yourself are the ultimate expression of power. So what you need to be doing is you need to be cultivating that deity, which is yourself.
Right, which is through the cumulative buildup. You are a result of the cumulative buildup of all of your ancestors.
That's right. So right? All their talents are available to you.
Right. So if you accept someone outside of your ancestral line as the ultimate archetype, you actually alienate yourself from your ancestral line.
100%.
And then serve the ancestral line of those who would be related to the whatever deity that you are functioning under.
Absolutely. Absolutely, brother. And also what it does is it does not allow you to learn what your own skill sets are, because you've removed your ancestors out of your conscious understanding of yourself. Because like you said, your deity looks like somebody who you'll find in Europe. So again, this is where we end up aping European civilization as the apex, the standard of everything
else. Because it validates them immediately.
100%.
And if you're doing with Islam, it's validating Arab type of vibe, right? But what you said is something I've never heard before, and I think it's profound. When you're talking about your capabilities, you're talking about, and tying it back to my grandfather who was mixing concoctions of medicine as like his profession, his hobby, his passion, his interest. If you don't dig into those, you won't have a need to dig into those if you don't deal with ancestral veneration, which means what you're saying is that you will never do an interrogation of what is possible for you epigenetically. That's what you're saying, right? 100%. I've never heard that before. I think that's very profound.
Oh, okay. You see, thank you then also for making it that succinct. But that's what Vodou initiates understand. They understand that the purpose of our system and all the kind of practices that come with it is to help you remember. And the only thing you're remembering is who and what you are in your fullness expression. And the only thing you are is an expression of the people who came before you.
Now let me say something to you that you're going to be very, very, this is going to really, really crystallize for you.
Go ahead.
So this is why these types of conversations are so profound. I didn't know where would we go with this conversation, but I suspected that we would have a very good conversation. Absolutely. The story of Kimani Marley. Kimani Marley was one of Bob Marley's sons, but was born out of marriage. As you know, Bob Marley had children from many different women while he was married to Rita Marley, because Rastaman believes in spreading your seeds. So Kimani Marley's mother, I believe, was she was into sports, and child, Kimani, was born in Jamaica, but then they relocated to Miami for a better life.
Mm-hmm.
Kimani knew who his father was, but never really knew his father, and started growing up in an American lifestyle in the inner city of Miami.
Right.
And although he had the Marley last name, he was a bit alienated from the Marleys because he was the son. Bob Marley had died, he wasn't around anymore. And so the person administrating the estate is Bob Marley's wife, Rita Marley, who is not so open to the children who were born out of wedlock per se. And so the Bob Marley legacy was passed down really through Bob Marley's children, who then become singers, who are Kimani Marley's half brothers, who he knows are singers, but he is not tuned into that. So he grows up in Liberty City, which is the ghetto part of Miami, and starts doing ghetto activities and getting involved in gangs, drugs, and all that until he's a grown man. And one day he just starts to sing, and they're like, yo, you sound like your father. And he'd known that, like, that he could sing, but it was never really a connection that he made that he could actually have a career in singing, because he never focused on the role that epigenetics would play to him, because he didn't grow up with his father. He was alienated from his father, and his deity was really Black American musicians.
Absolutely.
Right? That's who he looked up to. That's who he was into the rapper. So he picked up that their lingo, their slang, their whole, until he goes into a studio and makes a song called Dear Dad. With that Dear Dad,
okay, go on
form
then.
of his ancestral reverence, now that he's connected to his father and has benefited from getting those genes passed down. Now he knows the possibilities of what his talent really is, because his ancestor, his father, passed it down to him. But since he didn't grow up with his father, and he was alienated with his father, he started in music late, whereas Ziggy Marley started being a professional musician at the age of 8 years old. Ziggy Marley and the Melody Maker. So what you're showing, his story actually illustrates everything that you're saying.
And you've explained it so perfectly well. Exactly that. Exactly that. But Brother Heru, this is why they've told us over and over again that ancestral reverence is the juju, the witchcraft. That how can you so-called, you see, they use the funny word, worship your ancestors, when you're not worshiping your ancestors. In Akan tradition, we have this proverb. It says, "En sum obia sumuhu," meaning don't worship anybody else, worship yourself. Because like I say, you're the greatest expression of power there can ever be. And that's
you are the greatest expression of the cumulative force and experience of your ancestors.
Exactly. So this is why they're so keen that they tell us, stay away from the African ancestors. You're always worshiping your ancestor when you should be worshiping God. But then even Brother Heru, when we trace ourselves back to the source of all things, which is this concept they call God, doesn't that make this concept God your greatest ancestor though?
Right.
Because that's where everything comes from source.
Right.
That's your greatest ancestor.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah, man, this is a great conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love how you've crystallized and used Kimani's example for your audience. Because for me, right, Brother Heru, this is where we need to dig deep. You see, like the same way as you said, you started off elsewhere, and the next minute you learned and had confidence in your ability to do plant extraction to the degree that you start to also learn about the secrets. And by the way, I have tried your prostrate. Oh, what was it? I loved it. The
olive leaf extract.
Yes, yes. And I tell you what, my wife is here. She will look at me and tell you if I'm lying. I used to just pee like I was some kind of water reservoir. Yeah, I used it. I love the bitter taste. Yeah, absolutely. And now I go less. Your blood sugar was too high. And I go less. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So again, you didn't go and learn that in some chemist university for pharmacology and chemistry, did you? You had that knowledge buried within. It just wasn't in the foreconsciousness. But somehow that interest then got what? Cultivated. And this is what for all of us we have access to. But we can only know that when we start to look into our ancestral line.
Yes, but guess what? you can't worship or even look into your ancestors if you were taught that your ancestors never accomplished anything.
And this is where the politics come in to ensure, again, another way to make us feel worthless about ourselves. Yeah, 100%, Brother Heru. Yeah, so for all your listeners, this is what I'm telling each and every one. This is not special to anybody. It's for all of us to make that decision. This is a research project. Research your genealogy. That is a form of ancestral reverence, because you need to know that it's not every one of us who need to go and perform a ritual. As you said with Kimani, he made a song, and that song is a reverence to his dad. It's even called Dear Dad, you said.
Mm-hmm.
That is a song of veneration we might sing for an Orisha.
That was his first recorded song, and he did it as a grown man who was struggling in America because he was alienated from his father and did not understand that he was actually part of his father's legacy, because he grew up in poverty. He didn't benefit from his father's wealth or anything. So he was more his mother's son than he was his father's son, until he started to embrace his father's side. That's when he actually catapulted and he made that song. So, I mean, his life, his music, the first song is a great illustration and the truth of what you're saying.
Oh, 100%.
It's a great metaphor and the truth of what you're saying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you see, again, we cannot perhaps prove this by writing a formula equation, but the lived experience evidences this concept we're discussing. And for all your listeners, this is what the promise of what these knowledge systems give us.
Mm-hmm.
And the best form of ancestral veneration, without me giving you some prescribed ritual to do, is for you to just go and look in your own research. Just ask your parents, your grandparents, your uncles about, some of your who you descend from. Look at what they did in their life, what they were known for, what they were good at. And chances are you find that those genes repeat in yourself. Yeah. And for that sense of self and esteem, we need to understand that our potential is limitless. This is the promise of the knowledge system, that we can literally be anything we want. And we see this expression also in ancient Kemet with this individual they call Imhotep, who was God knows how many different things, because he was a multi-genius who explored himself. This is the promise of what the knowledge teaches us. But we need to do that internal work to reveal it to ourselves,
And I think what you're saying is actually, it takes it to another level, because those of us who've been into this type of consciousness and we understand that we had to relearn our history, our respect for our ancestors was more remote, in the sense of Imhotep, the pyramids and all of that, which helped us a lot. But a lot of us have ignored the greatness of our recent ancestors.
That's very true.
Right? And what you're talking about is not only is it important to go back thousands of years, but it's important to go back 50 years. It's important to go back 100 years, which a lot of us have left out of our analysis. A lot of us have left that out. And I learned that when I learned about my grandfather.
Excellent.
And here I am studying Imhotep and studying ancient Kemet and all that, to get a sense of self and a sense of togetherness with my ancient heritage, but left out my grandfather.
Your immediate
lineage.
Beautiful.
Yes.
No, absolutely. And
This
I think you've been driving home even more with Kimani. I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because that is even the fact that he was making a song. You've heightened my understanding and broadened my understanding.
And you will love it when you actually hear the song. The first lyric is, "Dear Dad, I didn't really get to know you."
Wow.
This is that.
Wow.
So he's saying in the first sentence he was alienated. Yeah. So imagine how that affected his development as a young man, that he didn't get to know his father. He was alienated from his father, so he didn't know what the possibilities for his life was. Absolutely. Because he didn't feel part of the Bob Marley legacy. He thought the legacy was his brother's legacy. So he didn't even bother to try to sing.
Yeah.
It turns out that he sounds more like his father than any of his brothers.
Absolutely. 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 Now, Brother Heru, can you imagine how many millions of us are across the world who are all still believing that we are nothing in comparison to Europeans or Arabs, that we can't even do simple things like manage our own families or communities, and these forced notions of nations that have been imposed on us? Can we now see why
Yeah.
we don't even bother to try? Because we don't think we're capable of anything. Because
Yes. Because we
have
all we all we all have been forced to be made to be Kimani before the song.
exactly, exactly. And that's also the story of Heru, to
Yeah.
find out who our hero is.
Yeah.
You know, understand?
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
Yeah,
man.
we need to live
Yeah.
our hero story. We have
Yeah.
to. This is the promise for me of what all the African spiritual systems are. And brother, it's all about the ability. You see the way that you explain yourself and share your concepts. We need to be able to break it down. For me, that's my challenge. It's one of my life purposes, to be able to make it so plain and clear, so that our people at least, and again, we don't have to start practicing it as a religion or a spiritual concept, but understand what it's about, so that in our own time and space, we can make those necessary steps to bring forth that transformation into our lives, because it's key. It's a tool for living, essentially. That's all it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, this conversation has helped me a lot.
Oh, thank
Like
you.
I've learned a
Yeah,
lot in this
thank you.
conversation, and that's what I said is that, you know, a lot of people who are educated or think they know, life is a complete learning process
Mhm.
every single day. And
Yes,
some of us reach a level in life because we're maybe looked at as intelligent by the people around us and all that. You get a false sense of security in terms of your own intelligence. And
absolutely.
so that's why I said that one of the best quotes that I actually adhere to is that the way of the advanced man is to assume that there's something to learn from everyone you're speaking to,
That's right.
right?
Beautiful. And
Be-
that's also my takeaway. It
yeah,
sounds like a
man.
Marcus or Aurelius quote. I've read something similar there. Yeah, no, it's
Yeah,
beautiful.
actually, I don't know whose quote that is, but it just it had resonance to me that is actually the way to be. So it keeps you humble. It keeps you
Absolutely.
humble because you may be
Absolutely.
surprised what you could learn from somebody who you don't think you can learn anything from, you know?
100%.
Um, and it may change your life in certain ways.
Oh,
So
yeah.
and I'm saying that too for the listeners who may, we're going to see voodoo in the title, and then some of the listeners will be, oh, I don't want to listen to that. They're talking about voodoo. Da, da, da. But I think that this conversation would have surprised a lot of people who thought that they knew what this conversation might be about,
I'm glad.
right? Because I think there were a lot of teaching and learning moments in this. I mean, I've learned a lot. It made me reflect a lot about certain things in my life, and there's a lot of truth in what you were saying, man. And it's actually making me like it certainly will make me a better person after this conversation, because there has been a certain amount of neglect of recent ancestors and what their accomplishments were and
Right.
how it affects us epigenetically. Because you
Right.
could be missing a whole field of study, a whole field of endeavor where it could be transformative, not just for you, but for your world around
Absolutely.
you, because you missed researching what your recent ancestors were good at doing.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's
Brother,
profound.
my battery, just give me 1 second. Let me plug this in, because
No
I'm
problem.
sitting far from yeah,
No
let's
problem.
plug in right here. That's fantastic. Yes, we're back.
No problem. I'm sitting here, I was eating an orange. I think I got some orange on my face and I was able to get it off,
Beautiful.
but I'm enjoying this conversation, man. I think
Yeah.
that at this juncture in the conversation, I want to move into your business endeavors,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk
Mm-hmm.
about your business endeavors and your stories around that, and then how people can plug into your businesses and how they can benefit from some of the things that you've produced.
Beautiful. So with the business endeavors, again, when it got to that time for me, I had to seek and I had to look in my lineage, and I knew, as I mentioned, my grandmother was a market woman. She sold produce. She was actually made a good living of it until there was a military coup. they deposed these market women, took away their wealth, all sorts. So after the first film, we then made the second film. Then myself and my wife realized that we were people who were being denied a lot of knowledge. So then we decided to make our films and put our films in educational spaces. And we decided to what one scholar calls intellectual enterprise. So how do we turn this knowledge into a lifestyle that will allow us to further the research and bring forth more of this information that's useful to our people, and as is changing our own lives, and basically be able to help others as well. So we created or made Ancestral Voices as an educational initiative. So from the first two films looking at African spirituality, we offer courses online. Our website is www.ancestralvoices, all one word, ancestral and voices together.co.uk, where we offer educational material and learning resources about African spirituality. That work there is in, as I've mentioned already, some of the top universities in the world. They gave us the grilling and they looked at the work, and our work was rigorous enough for the standards of, because most of our people ape. This is the civilization we're under. It's so-called pass the test. So you find our work in Harvard, you find it in Oxford, you find it in Cambridge, and it comes from exactly the same conversation that we've had. I don't deal in the superstitious aspect. We deal with the practical application of the concepts. So for those who would like to learn more, they can go to that. And it's in the filming of those series of educational pieces, as I mentioned, is why I met the Mambo Dorothy Deze at the time, who then gave me this term, Vodou, Theology of Liberation. And she's the one that, in the same way you've done on this conversation, managed to put it in a context for me to understand how Vodou was and still remains one of the greatest expressions of a Pan-African means of working together as African people to attain a common objective. And what we did was create the first and only independent Black nation still today. And that was because we looked at these principles.
And what people should do to understand that, what you're saying is profound, and I see how Vodou could have played a role in that, is that the Haitian Revolution, a lot of people think that the Haitian Revolution was just for Haitians or people located on the island. And what people should do is very instructive, is people should read the Constitution of Haiti under Dessalines. And the Constitution of Haiti under Dessalines says very clearly, because we have to remember the time period we were in was 1804. And in 1804, every African just about on this planet was under slavery or colonization by Europeans. In 1804. And in the Constitution, it says, any African, any Black person that can make it to the Haitian shores is automatically free, but not just free, but automatically a Haitian citizen. A lot of people aren't aware of that. Haiti literally was Israel before Israel for Black people, because that's Israel's policy now, that any Jew that can prove that they're a Jew can go to Israel and become a citizen.
That's right.
It is worldwide suffrage for any single person that can read. It's worldwide entitlement for anyone who can read, who can actually find themselves on this piece of land. It is supposed to be a sanctuary for these groups of people. That's what it is for Jews right now. Israel is that place, but Haiti was that for us before Israel even existed from 1948. Was there any Black person on this world who was being terrorized in any place we were, whether it's Brazil, whether it's Nigeria, whether it's Ghana, whether it's South Carolina, whether it's Canada, whether it's Jamaica? If you can get yourself to Haiti, you are not only a free man and woman, you are also a Haitian citizen automatically. And that couldn't have been done without a certain type of consciousness that was not just selfish about the people who are on the land and having just an ethnic identity, but they had a global identity that was associated with the veneration of our recent ancestors.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Brother Heru. And for me, that is so core that you also interjected and put that in there, because we also have to look at that concept of Ubuntu within the African systems, which is about how do we work together for a collective outcome. So this is why I recommended the brother Dr. Wayne Noble's book, Haiti's Unfinished Revolution,
Yeah,
because what some of the things he picks up on is the fact that the Haitian Revolution isn't fully finished, and it awaits total completion by us now. And as we continue to live, because we need to be able to see, and I even love the analogy with the Jewish state in the sense that Zionism exists as a global network, and it's so powerful because again it is global, so it can draw on its many arms and branches to be an effective force. And we're a people who are scattered all over the world too, so we have influence in different places that needs a certain collective manifestation to be directed to mutually beneficial ends, because
right.
that again is one of the principles within Vodou. So once Mambo Doherty again put that consciousness in my mind and used the same term, Vodou theology of liberation, I set off to make a film that explores this concept. And I saw it in Pan-Africanism. I saw it in how the Haitian Revolution manifested itself in terms of how there were enslaved Africans involved, and those who were born on the plantation had never even been to Africa, and how they got together to achieve that common objective. There's been no expression of Pan-Africanism that has achieved to what we saw there.
Yeah.
So those who are interested in that film, again, you can just Google Vodou Theology of Liberation, or go to the website www.vodoufilm.com, all
Right.
one
And
word.
all of the website links that you're talking about for the viewers, it will be below in the description. So you can just go to the description of this video and you see the links to all of the websites that my brother's talking about.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, brother. So for me, this is where my entrepreneurship comes from, whereby we're looking at awakening the consciousness of our people by doing the due research and making it available, whereas they might not find that so easily. But again, in doing so, because it's an entrepreneur, we have to look at multiple sources of income. This is why I came across people like yourself, where I get inspired to then look at getting into some stocks, to have extra sources of income. Because from when you're living and you're defining your experience, you need more than that one singular or a few sources by which you live. And, I have a family, your children, myself and my wife, we all need to support. So I've even ventured into things like we have I was speaking to a Ghanaian brother of mine when I went back. This was around 2015 when my mom passed, and we were having a discussion and we are looking at shea butter, yes, and the fact that the West has a certain level of encroachment on African resources. This brother of mine, he's a lawyer by trade. And he said, look, here we are, the villages, quote unquote, yeah, are just down the road to us. We know most of these people because we can trace friends who have this, that, and the third. Why don't we pull ourselves together and we can actually give people premium products where us Ghanaians are also a benefiting. The best way is fair trade. They set their prices, we sell them on the world market. So it led to the creation of again, it's an online retailing website called Ghana's Fresh. And what we do together as a collective, those based over there and those of us based over here, we bring goods directly from the quote unquote, again, I don't like these words, the villages, let's call it the rural areas, where
Yeah.
people do things as they've done for years traditionally. Because again, this is an expression of that Ubuntu consciousness, Brother Heru. We're all just looking at how we can work together and give value to the people who most big multi-corporations wouldn't even give a toss about. Yeah, you know, Ghana recently, the president is trying to lock off should we call it a manipulative relationship with Switzerland over the use of Ghanaian cocoa, because it buys it at such a depleted amount that even the farmers can't live off their own subsistence. Switzerland is meant to be paying them an extra every year of something in the range of £400, $400, and they've not done it, brother Heru, for decades, because they can trade with Africans with impunity.
Right. So what is it supposed to be? $400? What for? What?
As an extra.
What, like per ton or per pound or for what? Like $400 per? It has to be
the
some
400.
weight.
So I'm not clear on the exact specifics, but again, this is easily Googleable.
Basically what you're saying is they're supposed to pay a royalty that they have not paid
for decades.
Right.
It's been the way they've set up the transaction and have never held themselves accountable to it. So the most recent government, the Kufuor presidency, has now tried to block that off. He's blocked it off and said, you know what, we need to now start refining and processing our own cocoa ourselves, because then now we can get that value that you've decided not to pay. So this is how I'm approaching entrepreneurship, by supporting Black/African ventures, enterprises, and then also looking at how we can give something back. So GhanasFresh.com is just one example of that expression, because this was suggested by a brother. He told me, I said, that's a wonderful idea. How can I get involved? You know, and again, I've mentioned I'm interested in intellectual pursuit. So I came across you on Facebook. I loved what you were talking about. I went and I watched your YouTube presentation on how to buy and trade in stocks, because I didn't see myself being able to go to a school to learn that. And you broke it down so easily. It made me able to venture into that space. So it's about creating a kind of African ecosystem in my own consciousness, so that we can do what? Reciprocate. So these are some
Haiti,
of my.
In Haiti, they call it Kombi.
Kombi, yeah, okay.
They call it Kombi, which is the same thing as Ubuntu.
Right, you see?
Yeah.
You see? Yeah, so we have this consciousness. And I think the more we operate along these consciousnesses, this is where we create what we see, for instance, in the American expression that we call Black Wall Street, let's say in places like Tulsa, yeah?
Right.
And in other places as they've happened, because we learn to see value in each other and give value to ourselves. So yeah, my entrepreneurial ventures are all about giving value, so value can be given back, and largely through the selling of our educational materials, you know. So yeah.
Great, excellent, man. I think we had a great conversation. We're going on 4 hours.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
We're going on 4 hours. And to me, time is not an issue.
Yes,
a great conversation
absolutely.
is a great conversation. I like these long form conversations. I don't like 5-minute interviews, 5 minute, and I like to do conversations.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
I do think that you know, with the people I talk to, I like to have ongoing conversations, and so in some months we need to circle back and have some more follow-up conversations. I mean, there's a lot that we could have discussed that I didn't even get into, because I knew it was going to, we might be going until the morning, you know. But because what the listeners need to know is that this is the first time we've actually really spoken. So we're, in a sense, we're having an interview, but we're getting to know each other. And that's what I like about these conversations. And I mean, I've learned a tremendous amount. It's recalibrated some of my thoughts and some ideas that I had, and you helped me flesh some of those out through. And I think that's one of the good things about sincere conversation, right? Where either party is not trying to prove a point or be right or wrong or anything, but actually just trying to listen and get some sense of things. And I mean, I could have talked to some people who could come on here to talk about Vodou from a very superstitious point of view. But your approach to it was something that was extremely understandable, something very relatable, man. I would like to commend you for that and putting it in like real world terms that the average person can understand and demystify. Because the mainstream marketing of voodoo is something that is not attractive to most people, and it's not attractive to the people who it's actually here to serve the most. And that needs to change, and that's one of the roles that we have to do. We have to, you got Christians who think Egypt is a bad place because Moses was there, as as and the Jews had to be liberated from, the Israelites had to be liberated from Egypt. So you have people now, you have people of African descent really like actually not liking Kemet because it enslaved their prophets, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes.
So there has
Brother
to be.
Heru, they never ask why Moses, when he left Egypt, is when he started displaying these so-called superpowers. Same as Jesus, same as Abraham. Yeah.
Right.
So what was so special about the
Right.
place?
What's so special
Find
about
these
the place?
so-called superpowers. Sorry to interject, but I had to get that in.
Yeah. No. That's you. I mean, absolutely. I mean, we can get into it a lot more, but this is the power of narrative, man. It's the power of narrative and the power of reframing narrative, and you're in the right place. You're making films, which is the way most of our people learn. They learn through entertainment. They learn through visual films, visual media, and all of that. What are your next film projects that you are contemplating?
Currently, Brother Heru, because Vodou came out last year. So I think I'm gonna give myself a bit of time. There are a few in kind of just in the idea stages, but again, like you, I want to also discover other aspects to myself. So there are certain other things I need to start becoming more familiar with, things to do with more of a nature-based existence. They're looking at cultivating be it crops, aka farming. Again, looking at other ways in which I can, because I'm very serious about, I think one of the things that, using Ghana as an example, leads people to go into that superstitious space of religious expression is the fact that they're seeking hope. People need something tangible that puts something in they can feed their families, like just this little venture that I'm a part of called Ghana's Fresh. The few people that we manage to employ, if you see the way they carry themselves now within the last 5 years, Brother Heru, like when I first met some of these guys, they were just like, little meat guys. Oh, yes, boss. Yes, this, because they couldn't see themselves as people who had any value. But now just learning things like being able to go procure some shea butter, being able to go into Asari. Yeah, you see you're learning from me. Being able to go into the Asari, go and bring us some moringa that is grown in the middle of a space where there's been no chemical cultivation. You should see the way they now feel about themselves. Yeah, you should see the way there are pictures of them with their children. We can see a real life difference. So I'm trying to explore more of these commercial ventures before I come back to film. Because when I come to film, I think one of the things that I want to do, and I'll tell you this, and put it out there because they say you speak it into existence. So one of the most influential books I've ever read is Ayikwe Ahmed's 2000 Seasons. Yes, what I love about this book is the way that he presents the story of African people. It's not about one protagonist or two or three. He tells the history of Africa as we trace it from Kemet down to how we find the European, to turn that into a form of a TV series. Yeah, there's so much in that book. It can become at least a 5-episode series looking at African experience, even into maroon living.
Yeah,
because
it was
towards the end of the story, they live on a commune where they're separated.
It's actually the most profound book that I've ever read, right? And my email address, when I used to have a Yahoo email address, was Heru Isanusi at yahoo.com. And for those listening, Isanusi was the main character of the book.
Yes, you see.
And so that book had a lot of resonance with me.
Yeah.
No,
definitely. Man. Yeah, no. So that would be the next film project I would ever do. But in the meantime, I'm also going to keep looking at the ways in which I can change things practically on the ground. Yeah. So that
Sure.
Ghana can continue to be a space where our African brothers and sisters would also want to return to, so that we can all do the work of doing what, collectively elevating that motherland as much as we can, you know. So yeah, that's me.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Yeah.
This was great, man.
Thank you, and likewise.
Yeah, thank you for coming on, man. And we're gonna do another one in a few months just to check on what's happening with you and have more philosophical conversations, because there was even an angle about the Asarian resurrection and how it applies to our people that I didn't even have an opportunity to, talk with you about, but it would be good conversation to have for the second round.
Brother, I will come back as many times as you need me, because this
Yeah.
conversation didn't just feed you, it fed me too.
Yes, man.
And yes, it's when I do get into it and I put it into words as an article, I'll be sending it your way, because I've
No
learned a lot.
problem. Yeah,
Yeah.
man.
So thank you too for affirming for me, and I'm
Yes.
glad I also managed to give something to yourself and your audience.
Yes, and I have something to talk with, a few things to talk with you about on offline,
Okay.
which we'll communicate about, and let's see what we can do to make our recent and remotely past ancestors proud of us.
Beautiful. I'm ever ready, my brother. I
Amen.
give thanks every time.
Amen.
Yeah, man.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
I look
All right.
forward. Yes, King.
All right.
Yes.
Bless up,
All
man.
right. Bless
All
up, my
right.
brother.
Yeah.
Yeah. Peace.
Peace.
Peace.